So how did we get here? Let me tell you a story.
There it is. And the Giants will make it to the postseason as the 6th seed.
A franchise steeped in tradition.
A Super Bowl champion.
That's been passed down through generations.
Hey, baby, let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs and have some fun.
Believe it, and it will happen.
Was he inbounds? Yes.
And these guys, they haven't just accepted that legacy. They're on a mission to make it their own.
Sidearms and intercepted. Picked off by Julian Love at the 40. Sacked by Thibodeau. The ball's loose. On the ground. Touchdown, Giants.
You see, there's this bond, an undeniable brotherhood, a belief to never give up and never give in.
Shovel. Barkley breaks a tackle. Dives in for 2. Let's go!
That's the foundation of what we're going to build.
The heart and soul of this city, tried and true. You see, these fans believe and won't let it happen any other way. It's all of us, one goal, united in arms. Our way is tough.
Oh, what a hit.
It's smart.
Smart play, the right play.
And dependable.
The distance, it is good.
Playoff time is our time. Right here, right now.
And the Giants have won. Playoff, baby, let's go.
And we'll do it our way.
All right. Stand up, New York Giant fans. Super excited to have Big Blue Banter on the channel. They've been on before. They're on again. And we got a huge game to talk about. But let's say hello to Dan. Let's say hello to Nick. We'll start with Dan. What's going on, man? You hear me, Dan? Am I muted?
You are not muted.
Is Dan frozen? Dan, you good? Nick, you go ahead. Let's start with you.
I'm doing excellent. I'll speak for Dan. Dan and I are so excited about this week. Playoffs against a team that is very beatable, Minnesota Vikings. Just saw them a couple weeks ago, right? So we're really, really excited about this. Dan seems to be having some technical difficulties. Hopefully we can figure that out. But the Big Blue Banter podcast is ready to tackle those boys in purple.
I think what happened with Dan is he's just so blown away, and we're going to bring him back in a second. He's just so blown away by the intro. He's so amped up for the playoffs. He's speechless. He can't believe that the New York Giants are where they're at. Just going to say hello to a couple of people in the chat before we get Dan back in here. Then we're going to talk about everything, the culmination of the season, where we're at, how we're playing going in, how we feel we stack up against the Minnesota Vikings, answer all your questions. What's going on, Kirk Cousins in the chat? What's going on, Sean G, man? Thanks for popping in. What's going on, John? What's going on, Sports Influencer, man? Thanks so much for being here. Sean G in the chat, Kansan in the chat, Brian Dable in the chat. Dabes, what's going on, man? James Vegas in the chat, Afghanistan in the chat, Cowboy Suck in the chat, best name on YouTube, Arcstick, Paul, Chill Daddy, Super Necessary, Jeremy, man, what's going on? Nick, let's start with you, man. Let's just briefly talk about, while we wait for Dan to get back in, let's talk about this season. And we briefly talked about it before we went live. Expectations going into the year. I had the New York Giants at 7-10. I thought 6 or 7 wins. I actually thought I was being a little bit nice when I predicted 7 because I, figured a new coach. We lost a lot of pieces. You lose Bradbury. You got a lot of young players, new offensive system, new defensive system. Was worried about that second cornerback position being that we were playing Aaron Robinson. He was a slot. But I looked at the schedule. I said, all right, I could see 7 wins. I think you guys had them a little bit higher going into the year. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, Dan actually had him with 9 wins, so I want to clap for Dan right there. I had him at 8 and 9, so close enough, right? And the primary reason why I had them winning 8 games, Chris and everybody, was because of the schedule, mainly. Like, I figured the coaching edge would be there in certain affairs. I don't think I thought that the coaching would be this advanced. Like, I absolutely am in love with this coaching staff, and they're getting the most out of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones took a huge progression in his development and his growth and his maturity at that quarterback position, and this coaching staff is putting him into a position to utilize all of his unique traits, and I absolutely love that. But the Giants played the AFC South, which is the worst division probably in football. Maybe the NFC South can rival that, and they took care of business against the AFC South. 4-0, right? They took care of business against the AFC South. And then you had Chicago. You beat them. You had Carolina. Green Bay was on a down year, and the Giants took care of them in London. Tough still, you got Aaron Rodgers, tough place to play. They were able to have that Kayvon Thibodeau sack against Baltimore. And I just think this coaching edge really gave the Giants a chance to allow other teams to shoot themselves in the foot. And then the Giants just pounced on them like a python, right? They just pounced on them like a snake because this is such a well-coached and well-prepared team. Just like Julian Love said in the middle of the season, right? We want to bring you to the deep end of the pool. And then in the fourth quarter, we're going to drown you. And the Giants did that in several key critical games throughout this season. And I'm hoping that they can either do that or just blow out the Vikings come this game.
As David would say, they just keep chopping wood. They just keep chopping wood. But it's been a great year. It was a fun year to be a Giants fan. Now, what I want to say, you guys predicted eight or nine wins. But if I had to guess the fashion in which they got those 8 or 9 wins, you probably did not expect, because I'm going to tell you what, going into the year, I looked at the lines. I said they're a pushover. Not a pushover, but a team we could certainly beat. Going into the year, I looked at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm like, we could beat them. They're pretty, and we ended up beating them, but they ended up being a tougher team than I thought they would be. Same thing can be said for the Seattle Seahawks. Much tougher team than I thought they would be before the start of the year. If I would have told you, and I know Dan just popped back in, he predicted 9 wins, but there's no way in hell Dan could tell me he thought they were going to get the 9 wins that included an opening day game in Tennessee, beating the Baltimore Ravens traveling back from London. So even though you may have thought 9 wins, I think this was an even more impressive 9 wins, Dan, than you would have thought before the year started.
I think that's a very good point. It is a more impressive 9 wins. I even think, there's a case of they could have won more games. They could have won that Washington game. They could have won the Minnesota game from a couple weeks ago as well. And the greatest thing about where the Giants are at now, Chris, is that at least, and Nick and I have discussed this earlier this week, but I just feel like the playoffs in a lot of ways, if you're not like the team that has Mahomes, Allen, or Burrow, it just comes down to who's getting hot at the right time. And the Giants, from an injury standpoint, are just in so much better shape right now than they've been at any point this season. And I was just on a Vikings podcast with Matthew Collier, who covers the team from, he's a credentialed beat writer, and he's saying the opposite. He's like, damn, man, look, we don't know what the hell is going to happen at right tackle. He's like, both of the options for them at right tackle this week are horrible. One of the guys gave up 7 sacks in a 4-week span when he replaced Darisaw. The other guy is Udo, I think his name is, and he's like a right guard last year who was Pro Football Focus's last ranked right guard, who they might try to put out at right tackle. And then they have a backup center, a third string center. They don't know if Brad, it's a whole situation there where the Giants, on the other hand, maybe Adoree Jackson doesn't play. We still think he will. That's the only guy right now that we're looking at, who won't play, who's playing hurt. So I just feel like where they're at right now, that's the key thing too. The Giants are in a much better position than the Vikings right now.
And I think you brought up the best point in terms of why I'm relatively optimistic going into the playoffs. Now, I still have my questions. We still have a lot of holes on this team. We don't have an influx of talent. You look at the San Francisco 49ers, they got a lot more talent than we do. The Philadelphia Eagles got a lot more talent than we do. But like you said, I think the most important thing when it comes to playoff football is how you're playing going in. And there's no doubt about it. I know the record may not say it because we started 6-1. The New York Giants are playing their best football right now. If I would have told you at any point in the year we were going to beat a team by 28 points, I don't care if it was your high school football team, you would have called me crazy. The win in Washington was impressive based off the fact that they had an extra week to prepare. It was on the road. We should have beaten the Vikings the first time around. I think it was the best our offense looked all year. Either that or the Colts game back-to-back weeks. And then last week, and I know Jalen Hurts wasn't himself, but the Eagles were still playing to win that game. They're playing all their starters, both sides of the ball. And I know it wasn't our starters, so the guys that are going to be playing this week didn't play in that game. But it just gives you that much more confidence in our coaching staff that they were able to compete and nearly take that game all the way down to the wire against the Philadelphia Eagles with all their starters in there. And I think that should instill confidence into the team. Even though the players didn't necessarily play that are going to be playing this Sunday, that should instill confidence into them to say, wow, if our coach could do that, he's going to draw up a hell of a game plan come playoff time. So I just feel like everything is clicking right now going into this game.
I completely agree with you.
I'm so pumped up, guys. Just to read this real quick. Angel says, what's up, Chris? Been watching since 8th grade. Now I'm 5 months away from graduating. Been a hell of a ride and love to have been on it with you and the boys. Listening while I work. Go Big Blue. Thank you so much, Angel, man. Congratulations on the graduation. And it's been a long, bumpy ride, man. I started after the Barkley draft, and it's been tough. It's been tough, and it's nice that we're finally going to have a playoff game to hopefully celebrate. But regardless of what happens in this game on Sunday, it's been a hell of a year, and there's a lot to be happy about going forward. It's been a great year. I mean, give me some of your takeaways, Dan and Nick, this year, outside of the obvious, outside of Dable. Give me some of your prime takeaways this year that that you're super excited about going forward? Like, what things happen from within this season? You're like, wow, we're building towards something.
I'll start.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with the defensive line. Look, pressuring the quarterback and stopping the run are two of the tenets of winning football games on the defensive side. And we have some questions in terms of our ability, I think, at the second level to stop power gap counter teams, a lot of moving, pulling offensive linemen. But when you look at the personnel the New York Giants have assembled up front, it's hard not to get incredibly ecstatic about the future. The fact that the Giants picked up Dexter Lawrence 5th-year option, and likely he'll be a long-term New York Giant, because he is looking like he could be just one of the best, if not the best, interior defensive linemen going forward. Then you have two pass rushers next to him, Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeau. Those guys, to me, I think if Azeez Ojulari stays healthy, I don't know what he did during the offseason. I know he added some weight, but I feel like he is even more explosive, Chris and Dan. I feel like
5.5 sacks in 6 games.
I feel like his bend is just outrageously more flexible than it was even in his rookie season, when it was still pretty damn flexible. And then you look at Leonard Williams. We're not 100% certain how long he'll be here, but either way, he's a freaking great football player. So I'd look at that front. I think that foundation is just an excellent way to start building your roster. And I think just having a guy like Dexter Lawrence really coming into his own can really take this roster a long way. I really do think he could be a difference maker for years to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as from a defensive standpoint. We're getting back to old school New York Giants football, what at least I grew up falling in love with: the pass rush, with the O.C. Minors, the Justin Tucks, the Michael Strands, the Matthias Kiwanukas, the Jason Pierre-Pauls. It's starting to come back to that. So that's what I think a lot of New York Giants fans are really excited about. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, buddy.
No, you're all good. I was just going to say, for me, it's like a lot of 30,000-foot view stuff. For a while now, it felt like, for the Giants at least, we were kind of grinding in the same gear. We couldn't get out into third and fourth gear, of the sense that what you want to do as a football team when you're building a franchise at all times, every good team does this, is they draft well enough that they can re-sign their own players. They don't have to go to free agency every year and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on all these casts off guys that were not re-signed by their own team for a multitude of reasons, a lot due to injury, sometimes due to fit, where you can get lucky and get a guy who fits your system better than the other. But even then, it doesn't tend to last. It seems like by the end of those deals, you're trying to get out of them. You're pushing cap back. You're trading these players. And now I finally feel like they have those pieces. They have those building blocks. Nicknamed the one I'm most excited about, the one I'm second most excited about, I should say, and Dexter Lawrence. But if you look throughout this roster, I feel like right now the Giants finally have a lot of pieces that they can re-sign from within. Daniel Jones, Dexter Lawrence, Saquon Barkley potentially, Andrew Thomas, Xavier McKinney potentially, the locks being the three
Julian
that I
Love
potentially.
I don't know.
Julian Love potentially for me.
Yeah.
And Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau. So now you have, and potentially, hopefully, you get Evan Neal to come around and start playing better football. But
he will, I think,
and he could. He definitely should. Nick and I were very high on him pre-draft wise. But now you finally have a roster that has these building block types where you can get to the offseason. You don't have to be like, oh, let's look at a free agency. We have hundreds of millions of cap space, like these Jets and all these bad teams. And let's just spend it all. Let's just fire it away at these cast-offs. We can re-sign our own. Finally, feel good about that and know that you have because when you resign your own players versus go to free agency, you have so much more information to work with to make that decision, to give them all that cap.
You speak my language, man.
Allocate all that cap space. The Giants know these guys. They know how they work. They know their work ethic. They know their injury history. And they know all these things, how they fit in the system. Are they leaders? Are they not leaders? That other stuff, if you sign free agents, you just don't know for sure about any of that stuff. So now we're finally at a point where I feel like this roster has those pieces. They're young, they can be re-signed, and you know what you're getting when you re-sign them.
I love what you said about the cap space thing, because I hear this all the time on Twitter, people bragging about their future cap space. And you know which teams brag about their future cap space? The worst teams in the NFL.
Right.
The Chicago Bears, like you mentioned in previous years, the New York Jets. Obviously, you don't want a crappy cap situation, but when you have $100 million to spend, there's a reason for it. It's because you didn't draft well and you didn't use your money to retain your players. That's what cap space is intended to do. That's what the best teams do in the NFL. Right. When you retain your players, like you said, they continue to grow in the offense and the defense that they're accustomed to in the locker room they're familiar with. And even just almost equally as important for me, you get compensation picks. When you don't have to go out and sign Kenny Galladay's, when you don't have to go out and sign a Dory Jackson's, and say you lose a Julian Love, but you spend the bulk of your money on in-house guys, you're not going to offset those losses, and you'll get 4th and 5th round comp picks. The New England Patriots have been doing it for years. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been doing it for years. We talk about building through the draft. That is a part of it. keeping your guys in-house and not going and getting leftovers of Nate Soldiers of the world that the Patriots let go. So you hit the nail on the head. Everybody talks about, we're going to have $100 million to spend. I don't want to spend the whatever amount of money we're going to have this year on outside free agents. I want to spend the money on in-house guys and make smart acquisitions to bring in to help this football team. But I don't want to go out there and spend $18 million on a linebacker, $17 million on a wide receiver. That's not the right way to build a football team.
I think a primary way or reason why teams end up having all that cap space and they don't retain the talent is a lack of continuity, right? Because teams will just be turning over their general manager, turning over their coach, which we have seen here in New York now over the last, half decade. But look at Joe Shane and look at Brian Dable. Those guys are attached at the hip. They are best buddies. They are experiencing immediate success when not a lot of people predicted them to have immediate success. I'm willing to bet that those guys are going to be here for quite a while, which is going to mean that they're going to draft the guys that they want. They're going to vet the guys that they want. We're going to be on this roster who can earn second contracts, and we won't have to be in the mess of signing a guy like Kenny Golladay to a $72 million contract.
He caught a touchdown.
He did.
It was nice to see. It was nice to see him finally.
A great catch.
Yeah, catch of the year, I think. Was there a better catch this year by a Giant?
Great question. Was there a better catch this year by a Giant?
Like obviously not in terms of the importance, but
no, I know exactly what you mean. As far as the difficulty of the catch, I can't think.
I would imagine there have been. I think Richie James has had some, and I don't know though, because like that catch, like it was a little bit awkward though, dude. Like he went up for it, kind of missed it, and then it hit him in the thigh, and he was like, "Oh crap, I could just trap this to my thigh," and that's kind of how he ended up securing it. I think the most important part of the catch, which obviously goes in, it's very important, is just getting his feet in bounds. That was the really, really impressive part.
Right.
Yeah. But it was
Slayton
nice to see.
Was nice too. Yeah, Shimmy just commented.
Oh shit, did he? Okay, what did I miss? Oh, Slayton versus Dallas was nice. Okay, yeah, but it was just nice to see him catch a touchdown. I've seen a lot of Giants fans, guys, this week say that, could this mean that Kenny Golladay is going to start to have some kind of role in the offense in the postseason? I don't see it, but maybe he's utilized a bit in the red zone. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see if he could play some kind of role in the playoffs.
I think he could actually be a better option than Darius Slayton in the red zone, but I don't think he will play because I think the Giants are going to want to keep the continuity. I think they're going to want to keep the wide receiver who's been on the field with Jones the most. So when they get into those situations like we've seen in the red zone where Jones has to escape the pocket has to break, and he has to basically rely on his receivers to be on the same page as him as far as where he's moving to and where he wants to throw the football. He's probably going to trust Slayton more. I do still think Golladay gives Jones a better catch radius, a larger catch radius, and much better hands than Slayton in the red zone. But ultimately, I think the continuity will win out.
And he's one thing you can say about Slayton, he's always had drop problems. We know that, but he's always had pretty good chemistry with Daniel Jones. So I agree with you. I think they're going to go with what's got them there. Hodgins, Slayton, Richie James. Maybe a sprinkle of Golladay. We'll see. Maybe get Cager out there for a couple of plays. He looked good last week. I'd like to see it. I know he's a vulnerability in terms of the blocking department, but we need guys that can make plays, and he looked like he could make them last week.
I like the idea of using Cager a little bit, but I also like the idea of staying with 11 personnel and staying with what won against the Vikings. Not just what won against the Vikings last week, but last time they played them, but more importantly, what matches up best against what's left of that Vikings defense. Like, they just don't have the personnel to match up against the 11 personnel look. So while I do want to mix in Cager and I'd like to see him in the red zone, I would be fine if they didn't kind of use either of those two players this week, Cager or Golladay.
Me too. I'd be fine with it.
I'm a little curious on how Ed Donatel, the defensive coordinator of the Vikings, would play a 12 personnel package with Lawrence Cager.
True.
Because we saw when the Giants rolled out 12 personnel, which wasn't too often against Minnesota because they ran 11 personnel almost the entire game, they would actually respond with their base. At least it happened on the first play of the game. Giants came out in 12 personnel. They responded with base. And I just think having maybe their base personnel package, you can get an advantage from an athletic standpoint with Lawrence Cager because essentially he's a wide receiver. Obviously, Donatel knows that as well. So I'm just curious to see if he would actually roll out their nickel personnel like he did for the majority of the game against the Giants 11 personnel package.
I like it. I want to get on to the other side of the ball in a second. NY Giants 26 says, I've been standing all week, still standing. Let's go. And he also says, KT is awesome. Called Madden for an upgrade in the rating.
Huh. He got it, right? Didn't he get it?
Yeah, I think he did.
Nice.
Yeah, he did. Daniel Jones, they gave an upgrade too. They jumped him from a 73 to a 74. I saw that on Twitter. What is
1 point?
Yeah, what a grace that is.
How the hell did they only give him 1 point? What's the point of even doing that if you're only going to give him 1
exactly.
point?
And it had to be like they were trolling. Like if you're going to do that, you don't make a big post about it. Like you gave him 1 point.
Yeah.
Bob, man, thank you. He said, I would be okay with dipping our toe in free agency and re-signing our guys. Once a Giant, always a Giant, baby. Oh, And my last name is Wellington, so I'm a Giant for life. Wellington
Nice.
Mara. There you go. Bob, man, thank you very much. And I think that's the approach. Let's talk briefly about free agency this offseason. Who we think we're going to bring back, who we think we're not. I'll start. Like you said, I think Jones coming back. I think that's fairly obvious at this point. The only question is, what's the contract going to be? Is it going to be 3 years, 4 years, franchise tag? But I think he's going to be back as a New York Giant in 2023. I think Barkley's going to be back. It may be a franchise tag. It may not, we'll see. But I think he's going to be back in some capacity. Some of the players that I think we're going to lose. I think we're going to lose Darius Slayton. The wide receiver market is so thin.
Yeah.
And he's one of the 5 or 6 most desirable in the NFL. So I think he's going to have at least a decent size market. And the Giants are not going to have a ton of money to spend because you start with Barkley and Jones. You got Dexter Lawrence. You're going to have to extend him, I think, this offseason. Because if you're Dexter Lawrence's agent, with the year that he had, he just got voted as an all-pro. Are you going to allow him to play on a 1-year, $10 million contract? It's not going to happen. So you're going to have to extend him, in my opinion. You're going to sign Jones. You're going to sign Barkley. I think Julian Love's going to come back. We'll see. It's interesting because you also got McKinney in a year or two, and how much are you going to dedicate to the safety spot?
Right.
It seems like they're interested in bringing him back. I think those 3 core pieces are going to be back. After that, it gets a little dicey. I don't know who's going to – I think Slayton's gone if I had to guess, though, and he's probably the next biggest name. Nick Gates, I think he's an interesting guy to talk about whether or not he could be back or not. But I think those 3 guys will be back in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on this one. I think as far as what I would do versus what I think will happen, those are probably 2 different things, especially on the Barkley front. If it was up to me, I would not be re-signing Barkley, and I know it's a hard thing to hear for a lot of fans.
Listen,
I totally
understand your perspective on it. I love Saquon Barkley, and even I have come to terms with if they don't re-sign him, I will understand it because I look at all the holes on this team, and I look at the fact that they're going to probably have to pay Daniel Jones a decent – I'm thinking at least $26, $27 million a year, at least when you look at the quarterback market.
Yep.
So I would understand it, but I think they're going to at least franchise tag him. But
that's my thing. That's my thing. It goes back to what you said a little earlier about Dexter Lawrence, right? He has this 1-year guaranteed deal. The Giants were kind of lucky in that sense. They picked up the option before his breakout, but will the agent okay that? Will the agent accept that? I don't know. I do not think there's any scenario where Saquon Barkley is playing under the franchise tag this next season. So I've completely ruled that out. I don't believe it will happen. I'm set on this.
Here's what I'll say. I think you're right. I think they're going to tag him, and then they're going to re-sign him. They're going to try to buy time. Work out a contract. Yeah.
If you could tell me I could get Barkley back on the franchise tag, and then we get to let him go next offseason, I'm good with that.
Right.
And I'm good with it either way because I've come to terms with it. The Giants love him. He's a good locker room guy. He helps when he's on the field for sure. He's an amazing player right now. The issue with me with re-signing him is I want to know about what kind of player he's going to be 2-3 years down the line when we have all this cap space still allocated to him. Yeah. And the history of running backs after age 27 is not good. The history of running backs after age 27 with already an injury history is not very good, and he has a massive injury history. There's just nothing. He has to be the outlier here, basically. I mean, you could point to
Adrian Peterson.
Right. He's got to be Adrian Peterson because you could point to Derrick Henry, but even Derrick Henry's breaking down a little bit right now. So it's like anytime anyone points to like the good side of these running back contracts, it's always like, well, yeah, it was good at the beginning and then it started to get worse and worse as it went on. Zeke is obviously the biggest example. I mean, the fact that they've done what they've done with Zeke Elliott, it's really held back the Cowboys. They had to trade Amari Cooper. They'd be a completely different team with Amari Cooper this year instead of
They lost parts of their line too.
They lost parts of their line too. They lost La'el Collins. So there's been a lot of big misses and they aren't gaining enough from the running back. Having Zeke versus having those guys is a big difference. So it is what it is there. Now, as far as Julian Love goes, you bring up a great point because that's the only other one that's kind of interesting to me because like you said, in 2 years from now or 1 year from now, whenever it is, they have to consider if they want to re-sign McKinney. So now are you giving big money to Love and McKinney?
And they don't have the 5th-year option on McKinney because he was a second-round pick.
That's a great point. So now you have a lot because people always like to be like, oh, wow, we can just keep re-signing them all. Well, you can't. You can't re-sign. If you're paying a running back big money and a quarterback big money, then you're going to have to make some decisions, especially when you know you're going to reset the market with Andrew Thomas at some point at left tackle. He's going to get the biggest left tackle deal in the NFL. And Dexter Lawrence is likely going to get the biggest deal for any interior defensive lineman ever. So now we're talking about the Giants will have the 2 highest paid from each of their positions, a very high paid quarterback, one of the highest, if not the highest paid running back. it's not monopoly money, right? Like there is a cap at some point. They can't just do it for everyone. So Love will be the most interesting one to me. I think Nick Gates will come back on a team friendly deal, to be honest. That's just how I see that one shaking out. And that's a great thing. I'd love to have him back.
I love Nick Gates.
Great depth, and he can start if they need at either left guard or center. It's a great person at back. Love will be the most interesting one for me.
I think the debate around Saquon Barkley is interesting because on Locked On Giants, Patricia Trainer's show, she had Michael Lombardi, former NFL general manager, on the show, and he talked about kind of the difficult decision ahead of the Giants with Saquon Barkley, and it's something that Dan and I have discussed. It's how is Saquon Barkley as a receiver? I think a lot of the NFL market's going to look at, I think, his lack of,
They've started to use him more, though. I'll say that the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've started to use him more as a receiver recently.
No, like I understand, like he leads the Giants in receptions right now. He's important as that, but I think he only averages like 5.9 yards per catch. Right. I think a lot of NFL general managers around the league are looking at guys like Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey and these players who have had these big contracts who average like 7, 8, 9 yards per catch. Yeah. And when you watch Saquon Barkley, and Dan and I have discussed this in the past, as much as we love Saquon Barkley, and we know if you get the football in his hands, he can just do absolutely dangerous things, but he's not, I feel like, the natural type of receiver.
Like a Kamara. He's not
as like a Kamara, as like a Christian McCaffrey. And I'm wondering what that will do to his market. I think he'll get paid by a team who has cap space if it's not the New York Giants. I think John Mara and the Giants want to bring him back for all the reasons Dan listed. But I do kind of wish, and there is a part of me, and I hate saying this because I do love Saquon Barkley, but there is this part of me that wishes he was a little bit more dynamic as a receiving threat coming out of the backfield, because we know this offense and Mike Kafka has attempted to really use his receiving ability out of the backfield. We haven't seen like huge impact recently. We've seen him.
The Vikings game had a bit. The Vikings game.
He had 10 targets in the Vikings game. He was a big part of that pass.
They're all around the line of scrimmage.
They were all around the line of scrimmage, though. Yeah. So that's one thing that I look at Saquon Barkley. I'm like, do we really want to pay this guy $16-17 million a year for what, a 4-year contract, whatever it ends up being? It's one thing that gives me a little bit of reservation.
I don't think he's getting that. I don't think he's getting that. There was a time where I thought he was going to.
But the market might dictate that, though. Still, like that's what I'm curious about. I'm wondering.
Here's why I don't think he's going to get that. And I'm not saying he's not worth it. I think he's one of the best running backs in football. When he's healthy, I think he's one of the 3 or 4 best running backs in football. Have you seen the free agent running back class this year?
It's a loaded class.
It is loaded. And I think that's going to hurt his value.
I just don't. I wish that was right. And I think that should hurt his value, Chris. All logic points.
All it takes is one team. All it takes.
It's not even an all it takes is one team thing. I think what it comes down to a lot of times with these contracts is, look, he loves playing for the Giants. The Giants love having him, and they ain't going to lowball him and say, look at this market. Josh Jacobs is hitting the market. Right? They're not going to be like, because of this, we're not giving you anything. We'll wait it out, and we'll see what happens. I just don't.
I think they're going to tag him so they could exclude. They could talk to him without
other teams getting involved. But either way, he's going to want to be paid what he feels he deserves. Right. And I don't know if the Giants are going to say, we don't care what you feel you deserve. This is what the market dictates. You're taking this. I just don't see that. Ultimately, how it plays out.
So you think he's going to get that 15?
I think he's going to get a lot. I think it's going to be between 14 and 16 million per year for sure.
Well, how many years? 3 years? 4 years?
I'm hoping it's 2 or 3, but I think it'll be 3.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, listen, if it happens, I'm not going to be upset about it. I think he's a great locker room guy. As long as you make it a deal where you could maybe get out after 2 years if things go south, I'd be okay with it. I'd be fine with it. I do think he helped.
Look, you're right, Chris. Also, because look, in the end, with all of this, it's like, yes, there's a risk behind re-signing a running back with a major injury history at age, what is he going to be, 26 when he gets next year? And again, like as we've seen in recent studies, age 27 is now the fall-off age for running backs, where essentially their production just falls off a cliff. There's risk behind that. But at the same time, what have we seen the Eagles and Cowboys do, and a lot of these other teams do over the last few years? The Rams are another example. A ton of cap manipulation. They're just manipulating salary cap. They have all these huge contracts, more than even just the ones I mentioned: Dexter, Andrew Thomas, Barkley, Daniel Jones.
And another thing, as you're talking, I'm thinking about is options down the line. If things aren't going the way that the New York Giants maybe envision right now, you could trade them. I mean, you saw what happened with Christian McCaffrey.
Good point.
For people that say that there's no market for running backs, they got a lot.
Super Bowl team in a Super Bowl window will take that at a deadline anytime.
A Super Bowl window. If say you're a next year we struggle. We're a 6 or 7 win team at the deadline. We say, okay, let's see if we get draft compensation at this point. We'll give Barkley an opportunity to win somewhere else.
Right.
So you have options going forward. Barkley's a really talented player. And as long as he stays on the football field next year, I think he's only going to get better, because I think Evan Neal is going to get better. I think Jones is going to get more familiar in the offense. You have to figure we're going to get some help on the outside. You think about what Saquon Barkley could be if he has a legitimate threat on the outside that a defense has to account for. So
true.
I don't think it's the end of the world like a lot of fans make it out to be.
I agree with you on that. I don't either.
Yeah. And John, man, thank you very much. He says, we need to replace Darnay, the holding machine. Sick of seeing him bail out opposing offenses with his stupid holds every other third down.
I get that, John. Look, I completely agree with you that we could have a better option in the slot and coverage. The one thing I will say, though, about Darnay Holmes is he offers something that, Grant Haley offered it for a little while when he was with the Giants, but his ability to attack downhill on the line of scrimmage on these run plays, on these quick screens, these quick hitting outside bubble screens to receivers, Darnay Holmes does a fantastic job. And he's only 5'9", and he's not that big
I'll tell
either.
you what, he made one tackle on a bubble screen when I was at, I think it was the Colts game.
Yep.
I thought it was Julian Love at first. Then I'm like, oh, that was Darnay Holmes.
Right.
You're right. Up at the line of scrimmage, he's played well this year. He's a hard hitter, but he does get lost in coverage a lot.
Yeah, he grabs in coverage. He's not a great nickel coverage corner. They can certainly use an upgrade in coverage.
Yeah, and I think I think if I had to predict right now, I think Robinson's going to be the slot next year. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
But that's what I think, or him or Flott. But
I also think you're right because I think, and a lot of Giants fans aren't going to want to hear this, and I'll have to look at the draft class.
Drafting really a corner in the first round.
I think they're going to go corner a lot higher than people realize. I think ultimately, and it's crazy to say because I'm so happy. I'm not happy. I'm like medium with how it worked out because both would have been amazing options. But if both Thibodeau and Sauce were on the board, I'm very confident the Giants would have taken Sauce Gardner over Thibodeau based on what
I would have been shocked.
Yeah.
If we didn't take Sauce, if he was there,
now it would have been cool to see if they would have went Sauce Gardner at 5 and Thibodeau at 7 and pushed off tackle, which actually would have been really interesting to see. And I know they really wanted a tackle; they felt locked in on that. But if they had a chance at Sauce and Tibbs was still on the board, and they had such a high grade that I think they had on Tibbs, it might have been and ultimately, I think that would have been better for them long term. No offense, and I like Evan Neal long term. I don't like him on nearly on the level of a Thibodeau or Sauce as a prospect.
I mean, here's what I'll say: based off what we've seen from Tibbs this year, and I'm a huge line guy.
Yeah.
I would have said that probably would have been the better option. I mean, right now, Sauce looks like the best cornerback in football in his year,
which is crazy. He's the first guy in the history. I went back and I talked to someone from Pro Football. Now it's Pro Football Focus. I want to be clear, take their grades at times with a grain of salt, but for generally they're pretty close. And I talked to someone from Pro Football Focus. He went back through the whole database. There's never been a corner as a rookie who was ranked as their #1 rated corner in the history of since they started doing it. Sauce was the first guy to do it.
You know what, guys? I think the Jets are like the opposite of the Giants. In the sense that they are great at drafting cornerbacks.
Right.
We are not.
Yeah.
We're better at a lot of other things than them. But in terms of their Darrell Reeves, in my opinion, one of the top 3 cornerbacks. And now they got Sauce Gardner. So I wish we could get their ability to bring in great cornerbacks. But I'm sure they would like a lot of things that we've been able to bring in over the last couple of years. But anything to add, Nick?
In terms of just the cornerback position, and I see people in the comments discussing it, I think Cordell Flott is somebody who can play on the outside, possibly start on the outside moving forward, which is to your point, Chris. I think you can move Aaron Robinson back to what I believe is his natural position as that apex, that nickel defender in the slot. And I really liked Aaron Robinson's film going back to college. I thought he was another one who was aggressive in run support, and he has all the movement skills in terms of his ability to play man coverage. I think that would be an upgrade over Darnay Holmes. And Darnay Holmes, Dan already touched on it. I really appreciate his pound-for-pound strength and what he does in run support, reading screens. I think he's a very smart player. He's grabby. He was grabby a little bit at UCLA too when he was playing the boundary and he was playing outside. So I remain high on Cordell Flott, though. And that was one guy that I wasn't really 100% certain. And I think there's only room for growth with a young player like that. Remember, that kid was, 20 years old when the New York Giants drafted him. He weighed like 132 pounds or something like that, right? So now you just feed him those PB&Js, man. Shove him down his throat, get him back out there, and I really do think he can be a starter moving forward on the outside with Adoree Jackson, or if the Giants, and I think Dan might be onto something too, if the Giants aren't so sure about that, they might invest in the cornerback position as well, because we've seen the Giants bring in, how many of these corners that are going to be playing on Sunday were not with the Giants training camp? Quite a few. It's actually remarkable that Joe Shane was able to find these players who fit in pretty damn well. I know they got torched in certain games, but let's think about it, man. Wink Martindale puts a lot of pressure on kids like Nick McLeod and Fabian Moreau and Cordell Flott. And generally
they're
speaking,
going to have a lot of pressure this week, guys. They're going to have a lot of pressure this week.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I went through the Green Bay game to see what exactly the Packers did with Justin Jefferson. And I'm not a big Joe Barry fan, their defensive coordinator. I feel like he did a phenomenal job against the Vikings. And I think Justin Jefferson's not going to see a lot of one-on-one. He will when the
agree.
Giants decide to run cover 0 and when they decide to blitz and they do things like that, because Wink Martindale will wink, pressure breaks pipes. He's going to do those things. But I think you're going to see a little bit more, maybe too high type of stuff than we're accustomed to seeing, which we saw against the Vikings anyway. I mean, the Giants ran a crap load of cover 6, which is not Wink Martindale's specialty. Cover 6 is cover 4 to one side of the field, cover 2 to the other side of the field. So you have more guys deep. What happened the next week when the Green Bay Packers played them? Bunch of cover 6. Over 20% of their snaps were cover 6. Green Bay's not a huge cover 6 team. I think they ran it like
Green Bay smoked them.
They smoked them. So I think teams might have saw what Wink Martindale did, and even though it didn't work because Justin Jefferson went off, they said let's try it our way, and they even put a more heavy emphasis on Justin Jefferson with those in-breaking routes because he's really dangerous on those in-breaking routes. And you could see, man, if you watch that Green Bay game, Justin Jefferson's aligning in the slot right off the tackle. He's aligning out wide. It didn't matter. And it wasn't even always Jair Alexander. There was just always so many eyes on him. And I just felt like the Packers did such a good job driving top down on any in-breaking routes and getting after Kirk Cousins. And that's going to be the other big part of this game, bro. You have to get pressure on Kirk Cousins. And it doesn't have to be with 7. It doesn't have to be with 6. It could be with 5. It could be with 4. And with those injuries on the Vikings offensive line, I'm confident that Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, and Azeez Ojulari can get pressure with just 4. So you don't have to be as blitz happy. And now you can have more eyes to allocate towards Justin Jefferson.
That's 1,000% what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to double Jefferson for the majority of the game. I think what I expect the Vikings to do, because the Vikings know what we're going to do, I think. And I do think we're not going to blitz nearly as often as we normally do. I think we're going to try to send 4 against their banged up offensive line. They got weapons all over the field. I think what the Vikings are going to do to combat it, they're going to run a lot of wide receiver bubble screens. They're going to get a lot of quick passes out. You remember that screen that set up the 61-yard field goal against us in that game? I think you're going to see a lot of plays like that. And I'm going to tell you, I've said it all week, the guy that worries me more in this game is actually Hockenson. I'm more worried about Hockenson than I am Jefferson because I think we're going to double Jefferson, like you said, and he's going to get his yards. But we all know that we struggle mightily against the tight end, and we all know that Hockenson cooked us the first time around. He had that really good, I think he had like 12 catches or something, and he had that really good catch in the back of the end zone. So that's a guy I got my eye on. But at the same time, we didn't have McKinney in that game. So he could play a big factor in this matching up potentially against a guy like TJ Hockenson.
Couple things to add. First, on the more long-term discussion that we were touching on before about the corner position, Cordell Flott is a player who Nick and I had Eric Crocker, former NFL defensive back, on our podcast right before the draft, and he breaks down tape on these corners. He's got a really good eye for corner talent. Before we even drafted him, before we were even on to him, he said, keep an eye on this kid, Cordell Flott. And then I was listening to a breakdown from LSU coaches, and they were like, yeah, everyone's talking about Derek Stingley, but when you watch the tape, Cordell Flott looks pretty damn good. And so I still think that could be, and I love when we picked him because that's my type of pick. You take a 20-year-old who has not developed yet, not only with his body, but with his skill set as a player, and you say, here, develop with our coaches. We got the right coaches for you. We got Henderson. We got the right staff here with Wink Martindale. You'll learn from us. You'll develop, and you'll be a different player than the one who we drafted. So I'm very high on Flott long term, but I still think they could go corner early, to my earlier point, because I'm not so sure Adoree Jackson is definitely part of the picture long term. And I love Adoree Jackson.
I think
but there's an injury history.
Yeah.
Right. There's an injury history, and he was brought in by the last half. Yeah, so even if they love Flott, they could still look to get more on that note. Now, on the second note, the matchup for this week, something that's really interesting that I was just discussing with Matthew Collier, who covers the Vikings, is that with Brian O'Neill out, their right tackle, a lot of what they did, and they've been really, and let me preface it by saying this, Chris and Nick, they've been really unsuccessful running the ball this year. The transition from Clint Kubiak's system to the one that they're running now with O'Connell, the way Matthew Collier described it, he's like, Kevin O'Connell, their head coach, basically views the running game as like the vegetables on the plate full of steak. It's like, I guess I'll eat them, but I really don't want to do it. The Vikings have a 53.5% pass rate on first down, but and they're 28th in DVOA in rushing. So they are one of the worst running teams in the NFL. Dalvin Cook, he said, has one of the lowest yards over expectation of all running backs in the NFL. They basically describe it as him hitting a wall as a running back as he's aged. But one thing that they found success is running behind right tackle Brian O'Neill. Right tackle Brian O'Neill is out for this game. He will not be playing for the Vikings. And as I mentioned earlier, they're starting one of 2 horrific options there at right tackle. So like you guys said, I love Wink Martindale. I want to let him wink. I'm so excited about him bringing pressure, but this is not the game for it. Let your front four dominate this game. Don't worry about their run game because they don't run a lot of power and gap. They just run zone. Giants are really good at stopping zone runs. They can't stop power and gap concepts. So just simply let it be and drop, like Nick said, play cover 6. Put those guys in the back. So when Cousins is dropping back and looking for Jefferson or Hawkinson, like you mentioned, there's more guys in the area to potentially get their hand in a pass lane or do something like that. So I really think with the injuries on that line and how bad they've been running the football, the Vikings, you got to rely on that front four for pressure and just to win up front.
That's the key to the game for me is Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams, because I think they could overtake this game against that third string center. And like you said, O'Neal on the right side as well. I think Kayvon could feast off against him, but I think our pass rush, if we're going to win this game, that's going to be what wins it. That's going to be what wins this game. Durant says, how do you guys feel about this team's depth moving forward to the offseason after observing Sunday's Philly game? I still think we have a lot of holes in terms of depth. And listen, they played a whale of a bowl game. And I think that goes to the coaching staff as much as it does to the players, not taking anything away from the players. The players play. The defense played their butts off. They played incredible. I don't think the Eagles scored a touchdown in the second half, if I'm not mistaken.
They did not.
The defense was great this past weekend. It was all backups, and I definitely think we have some depth. I think we have some depth in the secondary. I think we mentioned Cordell Flott. We got Aaron Robinson coming back. I would like another high-end cornerback because I think that would only help Wink Martindale to be as aggressive as he potentially wants to be. I think we need some more depth on the defensive line. As good as Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence are, we certainly need some more depth there. Our linebacking core is non-existent. We need at least 2 linebackers. So on the defense, we need a ton of depth. The offensive line, we could use some depth. So we definitely still need to continue to build up this roster. So I'm happy with a lot of the growth from this team this year, but we still got a ways to go.
Yeah, the linebacker position is the one that Dan and I talk about a lot on the Big Blue Banter podcast. We really feel like there should be an emphasis.
Which, by the way, guys, sub them up. My mods are going to drop the link in the chat as we're talking. So sub them up. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure people check out your channel.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Yes. And I just think investing in that position is prudent. It's wise right now because the biggest vulnerability on this defense is any team that decides to run any sort of counter or gap type of run. We've seen it all season. Giants have been gouged by it from the Eagles to Jacksonville down in Florida, basically the entire year. That's why the Giants have done so much better against these zone-based teams like the Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks. But if you want to pull linemen, Giants, they just could not key and diagnose that all year. It's been a really big struggle.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And I will say this about depth as a whole in general. I think when you have the right coaches and culture in place, depth can start to look a lot better. You're just going to start to see things like we saw last weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles, where on paper, it kind of looks like the Giants don't have anywhere near the depth they need to play a full row of backups on both sides of the ball. But then the game plays out and you're like, wait a second. They kept it close. Wink Martindale did some really interesting things to force Jalen Hurts out of the pocket, to get him on the move, to get him off his the original reads that he wanted to throw to. And like you said, they didn't score a touchdown in the entire second half. And then on the offense side of the ball, they found some ways to move the ball there too with Davis Webb, who's never started an NFL game.
Davis Webb.
Right? And a slew of backups across the board in addition to him. And so I do think that when you have really good coaching and really good just overall general manager coaching comment, as Nick said before, like it seems like Brian Dable and Joe Shane are really lockstep with each other. It makes depth look a little bit better because everybody's bought in, everybody's locked in, and they're really taking well to the coaching.
Yeah, I agree with you. And by the way, as we improve our depth, that is going to help. What I think right now is the thing I'm most petrified about going into the playoffs, and it's the thing that you constantly overlook. The special teams.
Oh.
As you improve the depth, that will improve the special teams. But our special teams, every time we kick off, if the team returns it, I'm holding my breath.
I hate our specials, Chris. It kills me. Every part of our special, but not every part, right? Because we do have the 7th highest field goal percentage. We have a great field goal.
We got one of the best kickers in the league.
So it's not the full special teams, but every other part of the special teams, man, has been really bad at times this year. Every other aspect of it. So you're right about that, but I hold my breath on kickoffs. I hold my breath on punts. We've had punts blocked. We fumbling punt returns.
What was with the fake field goal this past week? What was that?
I think they're just trying different.
They were
stuff
trying stuff. Yeah.
They were just getting cute. I'm fine with that in a game like that. Get cute.
Yeah. But the special teams has been not a big fan of the special teams this year. Tudo says, massive salute. They respect to Chris, Dan, Nick, Mr. Guzzo, and all the diehard Giants fans in the house from Munich, Germany, and slap all the stinky boys losers. What's going on, Tudo, man? Good to see you, buddy. He's a fellow Paisan. Hester says, Nick, what do you feel is DJ? This is a good question. I want to get everybody's answer on this. What do you feel is DJ's ceiling? I guess any that's what I meant to say. Any quarterback comparison in terms of a prior quarterback.
Yeah, I'm not a big quarterback comp guy because everybody's perception of a quarterback is different. I'm not really big on the comparison game, and I haven't really watched all the other quarterbacks. Like I watch Daniel Jones every single week, but I feel like his ceiling is significantly higher than what I felt like in the beginning of the year. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that he has the potential to develop an arm like Patrick Mahomes or anything like that, but I do think you can have a winning culture and a winning football team with Daniel Jones, who time and time again this season has put the team on his back and led game-winning drives. And that's all we really asked for from Daniel Jones. Can you win or lead this game-winning drive? I mean, think about what he did against Green Bay when he had to drive 99 yards. Wasn't it 99 or 95 yards?
And that was without Barkley.
Without Saquon Barkley. Exactly. And he's done that throughout this entire year. I still think with another year in this system with Brian Daboll's tutelage, with Mike Kafka, if he is still here, knocking on wood, hopefully he is, Daniel Jones can still develop. I think he has the traits to make all the throws. There are just times where I feel like he's a little hesitant to pull the trigger. And that's one thing that I hope can be cleared up. And I hope that he can be a little bit more confident, but that could come with a little bit more time in this system. Because I feel like the arm talent is there. We know the athletic ability is there. And I feel like he has done a better job processing pre to post snap because this coaching staff is putting him into a better position right now.
And his pocket awareness has gotten significantly better. Significantly better. You've really noticed that not last week because he didn't play, but the 2 weeks prior to that, with both those touchdown throws near the goal line, he did a great job in terms of sensing the pressure. Quarterback comp, yeah, I know that's like a popular thing to say, and people ask me this question all the time. I think for sure he could be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. For sure. I think he could be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And a matter of fact, I think he's already pretty close to being a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I think that speaks as much to the overall talent at the quarterback position right now as anything else, because there's not a lot of great quarterbacks right now in the league. There's good ones, and you have some very super high-end ones like Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Herbert, Lawrence. But after that, to me, there's a grouping of about 10 guys, and he's in it. And if you give this guy the pieces, I think he can win you a lot of football games. I think he's demonstrated that this year. It's why I've been as outspoken as I've been that I want him back. I want him to continue to grow with the players on this team and this offense. In terms of a comparison, people bring up Alex Smith. To me, he's got a much bigger arm than Alex Smith ever had. Alex Smith had a noodle for an arm. I understand from a mobility standpoint, he plays in a similar fashion in terms of limiting the turnovers. And he came up with a very similar upbringing to Alex Smith, who had like 5 different OCs in his first 6 years or whatever it was. I think he's got a much higher ceiling than Alex Smith ever did. Alex Smith was a guy that knew his limitations and got the most out of his ability. But I think he's above a guy like that in terms of his ceiling. It's tough, though, because there's not a whole lot of – it's tough because I'm trying to think who I'd compare. I think he's better, similar, I guess, to a Tannehill, but better. I think he's got a higher ceiling than Tannehill, but I guess a similar type of playing style. But I think he could be better than him.
Before Dan answers, I'm really interested to see what Dan's going to say too. If he can continue to do what he did against the Vikings when he attacked the field side on that post wheel to Richie James, and he consistently starts to make defenses pay for not playing every inch of the field, which is something that I feel like defensive coordinators have done to Daniel Jones. They essentially disrespected him. They were like, we're going to take our cornerback to the field side. And what I mean by field side, that means the wide side. You have the hashes, right? If you're on the right hash, then to the left, that entire field, how it's wider, Jack Del Rio would take that cornerback and bail him to a deep half, essentially saying, I don't think you're going to throw the football to any kind of out route outside the numbers because maybe you're not confident or that's just not what this offensive coordinator is asking you to do. Whatever it was, they weren't making that throw. But against Minnesota, he did. On the post wheel, Kenny Golladay kind of created a pick for Richie James to come from the number 2. It was just a switch release, something the Giants do all the time. And Daniel Jones diagnosed it quickly and fired the football. And I know he has the velocity. I know he has the arm talent to do it.
Did you see the Slayton throw? Where he's falling down to the ground?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, no, that's all well in there. I'm just talking about from, I don't even know if confidence is the right word, but just you have the arm talent to do it. Make the defenses pay if they're not going to play every inch. And if he consistently does that and he continues to do that next season, if he is here as a New York Giant, I feel like I will be much more confident about his future, even though I'm already pretty confident about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as it goes for me as NFL comps go, I'm kind of in the same boat as you guys. And it's not that I don't I don't love doing the comps, but I also just feel like there isn't really a great comp for what he can be. So on the Alex Smith comp, if you're just looking at this current season, his breakout season, it is very similar to some of Alex Smith's best
And his
seasons.
upbringing too, with the instability.
And his upbringing, it was a great point with all the OCs, but this specific season is very comparable, right? Dan Jones has not attempted many passes that were above 20 yards. They've mostly been between 1 and 20 yards. I think he has 4.6% of his total passes have been 20 plus yards in the air, similar to what Alex Smith did. Alex Smith in his high season ran for 495. Jones runs for more. He ran for 700 plus. I think he's a bigger running threat. But I think what you said, Chris, is best. It's not a good comp long term. The question was, what's his ceiling? His ceiling is not Alex Smith because he has a bigger arm than Alex Smith, and you said it best. But one thing Alex Smith did do, especially later in his career, once he matched with Andy Reid, was he started to throw down the field a little bit more with a little bit more frequency. He started to create bigger plays with his arm, just throwing the ball down the field. So for me, if Jones is going to reach a ceiling, and again, I don't really know what that is. In some ways, I think it's kind of like, just to throw a name out there, and this is a crazy name to put out there, so it's not like don't go crazy with it, but somewhat like a Steve Young type is kind of what I see.
His play style is similar.
Yeah.
Play style. Now, Steve Young's one of the top 10 quarterbacks of all
Yes,
time.
I'm not comparing. I'm not saying, and we're talking about ceiling here. We're not saying what is he going to be. We're talking about ceiling.
Yes.
But what it all comes down to for me is exactly what Nick said. There's still, to me, if you're going to be an elite top 5 quarterback in the NFL, you need to attack all areas of the field consistently to the point where defenses are adjusting how they play you because of where you're attacking. And to me, there's still areas of the field where Daniel Jones is not attacking. Outside the numbers, between 15 yards and above, he's just not attacking those areas early and often. Now, my whole thing is, how do you get there? It's what Nick said. If you get more comfortable in the system and you start to have receivers who you trust to win in those spots, you may start to then throw the ball to those spots, because Nick and I both believe he has the arm talent to do it. But part of it is not just arm talent. Part of this is on him mentally. It has to click for him. He has to make these decisions quick, and he has to get the ball out there. There was a play that Steven Ruiz broke down on Twitter, and a lot of Giants fans piled on and went crazy on him because no one can accept any criticism, it feels like, at times, for the quarterback. But Steven made an interesting point. It was a very simple route combination where the corner came down on a cover 2, and there was an open go round. Jones just threw the underneath.
Oh, I know the exact play you're talking about.
And it's fine. That's what they're teaching him to do this season. It's what they want him to do. They want him to get the ball out quick. The Giants have the 6th best completion percentage in the NFL. They don't fumble the ball on offense. They don't throw interceptions. The whole goal of this offense is keep this thing moving. Efficient throws, efficient runs. They have the 8th best rushing DVOA. They have all sorts of efficiency. They don't turn the ball. So I get it for now. But if he wants to reach that ceiling of top 5 or even better, then he has to start consistently attacking those areas, because in the playoffs, that's where those types of quarterbacks stand out. Because
100%.
because defenses can take away the middle of the field. But if you are a type of quarterback who can hit outside the numbers with consistency, there's no real way to stop him. Remember that comeback Trevor Lawrence made a few, like 5-6 weeks ago? I think it was against the Ravens. He was just ripping balls outside the numbers, and there was no way for the Ravens to stop him. There's no defense to stop a quarterback who can do that. And Daniel Jones has the arm talent to do that. So it's just a matter of when he starts to be more willing, I guess, or just when it starts to click for him, where he's starting to recognize the coverages post-snap real fast, where he can make those throws.
And I think next year you're going to see it more. I think next year, I'm not saying he's going to be Trevor Lawrence. I don't know what he's going to be. But I think next year you're going to see a more aggressive Daniel Jones, because I think they're going to get him more help, and I think they're going to instill that into him. I think some of it definitely has to do with what they're telling him too, because they know the limitations of this team. They're saying, get the first down, move the chains, don't turn the football over. I think that's been the mission this year. It was a very similar mission with Josh Allen in his second year. Not, I know Jones on his 4th year, but I'm just saying, with Josh Allen in his second year, he cut down on the turnovers a ton. Then they got him Stephon Diggs. They started to open up the offense. So that is what I think it's trending towards next year. I think we're going to go out, we're going to get them some weapons, and you're going to start to see them open up this offense next year. That's just what I think. And I think you've started to see it over the season. We're not near where we want it to be yet, but we're starting to see them gradually open it up. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about the future of this team. Peter says,
I want to talk one more point on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jones. Yeah, I don't know if Nick want to jump into. I'll just get this out there. Part of why I'm more excited about his ceiling than I've literally ever been. This is the most excited I've been about Daniel Jones since, not literally, after it's impossible to not have been more excited after that first game against Tampa Bay. Yeah. I literally felt like maybe the Giants drafted like next freaking Peyton Manning. He was so good in that game. And that's one game. That's always how it's going to feel on a 1-game sample size when someone has that good of a game. But since that moment, this is the highest I've been. And it's because there are some things that he's improved on this year that I just didn't know were possible. The pocket presence is great, and it's the most important thing, but I thought that was possible. I thought he could get better with his pocket manipulation and pocket feel. But his ability to throw on the run while moving off platform and create these off platform plays, it's not
And there's
something
been
I was sure.
There's been multiple
It's
throws.
all littered throughout his film this year. And it's not something I was sure that was going to ever happen going into this year.
Because you break down film and you do a great job. I'm going to tell you some of what off the top of my head, and I'm sure you're going to remember other ones. Off the top of my head, I'm going to give you some throws that I didn't necessarily know that Daniel Jones had in his arsenal before this year started. First one is the Slayton throw that we just talked about earlier. Going to, I know it's only a 10 or 12-yard throw, but the zip that he was able to get it to without stepping into it. The other one was the Texan game where he hit Slayton, where it was across the field, hash to hash, couldn't step into the throw, was flat-footed, and that was the one where Slayton ran it in for 50 yards or whatever after the catch. But the throw to me, when I saw him make it, I was like, if that's Alex Smith, that's a pick six, because I don't think he has the zip to be able to get it there in that fashion. Another one that really impressed me, the throw to Richie James that set us up for the 60-whatever yard field goal for Graham Gano. If you recall, who do we play that game? It was the game we lost when Gano missed the 60-yard field goal. Who was that?
Was that not Detroit? I don't remember what game that was. Nick, do you remember this one?
Was it a last-second field goal?
Yeah. We're Gano.
We had Gano
tried it out for a last-second field goal. Missed like a 60-yard.
Why am I not remembering this?
Somebody's going to say it in the chat.
Help us in the chat.
Washington tie. It was the Washington.
Oh, the tie. Yes, the tie.
The throw to
we said loss, so that threw me off.
For that field goal.
Yes.
Where he fit. I don't know how he fit it in there. So he's made some throws this year that I didn't know he had in him.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a lot of them have been, some of them have been, like you mentioned, in a lot of those spots, those were in the pocket, but a lot of them have been outside the pocket when he's when he's forced off platform and to create out structure. My favorite throw this year, actually, there's a lot of them, so it's hard to pick, but my favorite throw might have been the 2-point conversion throw to Bellinger against the Vikings, because he did something that he doesn't always do. And it's something that plagued him in that Dallas loss in Dallas, where he missed Saquon Barkley in the flat on a throw that he'd tell you he wants back. He changed his arm slot, which allowed him to change the trajectory of the football. And that he threw it on a 3/4 angle, 3/4 arm slot. And that got the ball just over the defender and right into the hands of Bellinger, but not too high, because then Bellinger would have been out of bounds. It's literally the perfect throw in that spot. And so that was just one area that I think he's improved that I wasn't necessarily sure he would. Another area is something that really clicked that Nick said a little bit earlier. When you see things that happen like we saw against Washington, so it's literally week to week. Against Washington, Nick brought it up. What who's their coordinator? Jack Del Rio was doing was really interesting. Honestly, there were times where he just rotated that corner from the field side out into the deep half and said, F it, I'm leaving that field side wide open. And you could even see it. Hodgins putting his hand up, these wide receivers on the outside putting their hands up, throw the ball. Jones didn't throw it. So what happened the very next week? He made the Vikings pay with those two throws, the long one to Hodgins on the sideline and the long one to James off the switch release. He literally picked that up, and that's what really stands out to me. Jones took to the coaching. He recognized it. He was obviously told that. Like, they watched the film. They're like, look, Daniel, you had this. But then it's one thing to know it and hear it from the coaches, and it's another thing to actually apply it when the bullets are flying and you're snapping the football and there's a pass rush coming at you, and you really have to recognize this thing fast. And when he did that, and when he made those two throws against the Vikings, literally the week after that defensive coordinator basically just gave him the field side, that showed something to me. That showed to me like this guy is really clicking and picking up this system.
Good stuff, man. Nick, go ahead, buddy.
I was just going to reiterate a lot of what Dan said. It's really just noticing and then applying it. I want to see him apply it. And I think that's the only way he can reach his ceiling. We're starting to see breadcrumbs of that, because as accurate as Jones has been and as efficient as his offense has been, that's all well and good. He still has one of the lowest yards per attempt in the league. And I think we have to be honest about that, right? We just want that to grow a little bit. And I think a lot of that is the coaching point that you were talking about, Chris. I think the coaching staff is telling him, look, if you don't love what you see, don't push it. Okay. Use your legs. That B gap comes open, run the football. That's all well and good if you don't love your first read. And we've seen Jones do that time and time again. But recently, we're starting to see him challenge a little bit more vertically. And if he can carry that into the wild card game, the Giants win the wild card game, the divisional round, and then into next year, I think that's the way we can get Daniel Jones to reach his ceiling. And that ceiling, I'm not really 100% certain where that ceiling lies, but we need to see that on a more consistent level for us to really believe that he's going to reach it.
Yeah, and I hope he does. Pete says, keep in mind this is Daniel's first playoff game, and we only have 17 players with playoff experience. Keep in mind this is no cakewalk.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys this, because Brian Dable was asked about this. And I am keeping that in mind, by the way. Eli Manning, his first playoff game was horrible. That we didn't get the ball over the 50-yard line against
Oh, is
Carolina.
that Carolina? Oh, I
Yeah.
remember that game. That
And
was
I
such
think a
rough
lot of
game.
that, by the way, had to do with the fact that John Fox used to be the DC for the New York Giants, and maybe he knew some of the tendencies with the team. But regardless, we got our clocks cleaned in that game, and Eli Manning was atrocious. I think he threw like 100 yards, maybe 3 picks. Like, he was bad. But do you think experience is important come playoff time, or do you think it's overrated?
I've seen, Dable was asked that question. I kind of think it is. I think it's important. I know he kind of deflected it and said the opposite. I still think it is important just to kind of get your feet wet in the playoffs. And Jones kind of talked about it at the podium too. Like, look, before every game, you kind of have some nerves and stuff like that. Well, this is playoffs. It's lights are a little bit brighter. I do think there is value in actually getting to the playoffs and getting that much closer to your end goal, which is winning a Super Bowl. So I know Dable kind of deflected the question a little bit away from what I just said, but I think there is definitely value. But at the end of the day, Dable preaches like the same thing, right? We're treating every week the same. Preseason week 1 is the same as the wild card week, but we're all freaking human. We know that's not true. And just Dable's not going to admit that to the media.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I'm pretty much in lockstep with what Nick said, just maybe a little bit lower on that scale of how important it is to have the experience. I just think a lot of what football comes down to is matchups. First of all, that's the most important thing, in my opinion, and doing your job and executing, like Dable, basically, like all these good coaches preach. And so, they go into this game, they go into any game, they still have to execute. They still have to do their assignments, still have to do their job to the best of their ability, if it's a playoff game or if it's not. And you can see that every week the Giants have played, they've kind of had that mentality. Some games haven't been as good as the others. The Eagles game got out of hand early, and it felt like we were kind of blown out in that game. But I didn't see any quit in the team, even in a game like that. So it is worth something. I just don't know how much it is worth. It's one of those hard things to quantify. It's just like the whole argument last week of like, should the Giants trot out every starter against the Eagles or should they not? It's very hard to quantify that. But one thing I can quantify is if Andrew Thomas goes down in that game, we are a much worse team for this game. That was my whole point. Like, there's things you can't quantify. This team, if they got injuries, you can quantify that's going to hurt them. I'm not so sure how much you can put tangible quantification into, like, if we play our guys hard in week 18, will they have the same momentum as if we don't? So that's the harder thing.
I think it was the perfect scenario this past week. We got to rest our guys.
100%.
And we still built momentum.
Yep.
So everything worked out perfectly for and I was one of those people. I didn't want them to, I was a person that definitely understood sitting them as well, but I was a guy, I don't want to lose that momentum either going into the playoffs. Right. You got the best of both worlds. You got to rest your starters, and you still built confidence going into the playoffs. So it worked out perfectly and I know you said you had to go around 7, so I don't.
Yeah, I'm going to actually jump off, guys. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. Chris, we got to do this again sooner than this gap between this one and the last one. So
let's make a deal right now, and Nick's going to stay on. If we win this week, we'll do it again next week.
Okay, done. Lock it.
Love it.
So we're doing it again next week because we're going to win.
Yes, exactly. I haven't been more confident going to the playoff game, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing, but in a long time. So I'll end it on that note. You guys carry the rest. Good talking to you both, and go Giants.
Be good, man. Enjoy the pod, man.
I didn't want to rain on Dan's parade there, but I was going to say maybe it's because we haven't been in the playoffs in a long time. But guess what? That's going to change up right now, Chris, because the New York Giants have some professionals in the house with Joe Shane and Brian Dable.
And we're going to talk some playoff football because I'm getting to Andrew Marchese's chat after this, and he's saying we got to talk playoff football. We're going to talk about this game. We're going to talk to you guys. King Casper says, re-sign Saquon, DJ Love, sign Edmund. Deontay Foreman for a power running back behind Saquon, traded 2 for DJ Moore. That's a lot. That's a fantasy offseason. Use a 1 on a cornerback, 3rd on interior offensive line, rest on the – listen, if they have enough cap space, sure. I don't know what Edmund's market's going to be. I know DJ Moore makes a boatload of money. He makes like $20 million a year. I don't know if they'd have the cap space to do something like that, but I would love it.
The Edmonds thing is interesting to me too, Chris, because this is obviously someone that Joe Shane and Brian Dable are really familiar with. And that dude is so freaking long and so young. He's only 24 years old, and he's been in the league since, I think, 2018. He was drafted, I think, the same year as Josh Allen, if I'm not mistaken. So I would be really open to bringing Edmonds in.
Yeah, and obviously the ties to Buffalo, it makes sense. That's why people bring it up. Andrew Marchese says, yo, screw the offseason stuff. You realize we play the Vikings in the playoffs in a few days, right? Let's talk a little bit more about it, man. How confident are you going into this game? And we've talked about where we stack up well against them, the defensive line. And I'm going to tell you what, I think we stack up well offensively too. Matter of fact, I think almost every team in the league stacks up well offensively against them because their defense stinks. But tell me, how confident are you as a fan going into this football game?
I'm confident. I wouldn't say that I'm overly confident. I'm not going into this game, and I'm typically kind of reserved with stuff like this.
Yeah.
I'm not going into this game, Chris, being like the Giants are going to win, right? Like I can say that like in a loose fashion, but I don't necessarily think that because I think there's so much football that can be played, and we've seen good teams lay eggs before. I don't think the Giants are going to be that type of team. But if you had to sit me down and say, Nick, what do you think is going to happen with this matchup, and try to be unbiased, I think the Giants should win this football game because of the injuries on that offensive line, because of the Giants' defensive line, because of how well this Giants offense is playing and passing the football out of 11 personnel, and how well they're running the football out of 11 personnel. Look, man, this team, the entire year, Chris, they were running the football out of 12 personnel. They were bringing 6 offensive linemen for a while. Like there were so many iterations of this Mike Kafka offense throughout the year. And now they're running out of 11 personnel, and they're actually have a better EPA running out of 11 personnel than they did out of 12 personnel. So I think that's another thing that we can have with Saquon Barkley out of the backfield and this 11 personnel package. Hopefully we can get Daniel Bellinger a little bit more involved. I think Mike Kafka is going to have a fresh, approach and just game plan to attack this Vikings team. I think you're going to see a lot of boundary stacks. You're going to see a lot of switch releases, things that we've seen over the last couple weeks of the season. And ultimately, I think the Giants will win this football game, but anything can happen. And we know that. And it's not an easy place to play up there in Minnesota. So I think any of those Giant fans that are going to be there, be loud, wear your blue, just don't wear purple or white or whatever the hell they're doing up there in Minnesota.
No skulls. I don't even know
no
skulls.
Skulls, whatever that chant is. Nah, we're not about that life.
But I'll tell you what, though, the other thing that I think the New York Giants have done really well, we talk about the running game. One part of reinventing that running game, actually, I think has been throwing the ball. The short passes have almost been you remember the game against Washington, I think it was, where they got the ball out really quick every throw. That's almost an extension of the ground game. The way that they were able to use Saquon Barkley on the swing passes, they've gotten him more involved. We talked about the I think it was 10 targets against Minnesota when they played him. So, yes, you said they got away from the 12 personnel. I also think they've integrated a quicker passing attack at times, too, when they didn't run the ball quite as much. When they started to throw the ball more, it's almost an extension of the ground game. So they've gotten creative in terms of opening up this offense over the course of the year. They've changed week to week. And the thing that blew me away when I looked at the yearly statistics, do you realize the New York Giants, at least statistically speaking, if you go based off of yards for, yards against, points for, points against, we rank better as an offense than a defense. We are 15th in points for, we are 17th in yards for, or maybe it's vice versa. We are, I think it's 18th in yards against, or no, 18th in points against and 25th in yards against. The offense actually finished ranked higher than the defense, which when I read that the other day, I was like, really? I was surprised by it.
No, it's not a surprise, though, man, when you think about the injuries that the Giants have suffered
True,
in the
with the
back
secondary.
end, really.
Yeah.
We talked about it all offseason, almost ad nauseum. I mean, it almost got annoying where we're like, whoa, if they suffer an injury at the cornerback position, they're screwed.
Everybody was saying it, man.
But it made sense, right? And I still think that guys like Nick McLeod, who, yes, maybe he's not an NFL starter, but him coming in and playing the way that he played, and we saw that early on against Green Bay. Remember, they got Green Bay Packers off the field, I think on a 3-and-out in a really pivotal position where Nick McLeod got inserted into the game, and they were just attacking Nick McLeod. And then he came up with that huge PBU against Randall Cobb, got the Giants off the field, and that was huge. And then throughout the year, he's kind of made these plays. So I feel like Joe Shane just did a good job replacing their top talent. Obviously, they're not going to play to the level of the top talent, though. And I wanted to kind of maybe circle back a little bit to something you said about the 11 personnel and the quick passing attack. Look, the Giants are relying a lot on this quick game passing attack, and I feel like it was kind of born and realized when the Giants were getting their asses kicked by the Detroit Lions. Remember in that second half, the Giants were down like 24-6. The game was over. It was embarrassing. Detroit wasn't really running that exotic of a defense or anything like that because the game was over, but the Giants came out in the second half, Chris, and they just slung the football, and they allowed Daniel Jones to get comfortable throwing the football, and we didn't see that against Washington. We saw it a little bit against Dallas, right? We didn't really see it against Washington, though, where the Giants went with a heavy 12 personnel approach in that tie. But then after that, they really kind of adjusted and went back to what they did in the second half against Detroit in a blowout loss, and they found success. They found success against Minnesota. They found success against the Colts. They were throwing the ball against the Eagles, but I mean, it wasn't really worth much because the Eagles offense just steamrolled the Giants defense. But now here we are, and I'm really excited about the quick passing game and how Daniel Jones is delivering the football in a decisive manner to these wide receivers and tight ends.
Yeah, and another game I'll think, earlier in the year, the Jaguars game, they did it too, if you recall, in the first half. The first half, it was quick pass after. I think he threw for 160 yards, 170 yards in the first half, and then he threw for like 20 in the second half because that was the game where they just ran the hell out of the ball. I think Jones only threw it once in the fourth quarter because Saquon Barkley ran it down their throat. But that was really the first game this year, that Jaguars game, where I started to see them go with that quick passing game that we're talking about, that you really started to see grow over the second half of the season. But this offense has just evolved over the course of the year, which I thought it would. Now, I thought they'd open it up earlier than they did, but obviously we don't have a lot of talent at the wide receiver position. The offensive line has its limitations, and Jones in a new offense. But I'm glad it's come to the point where it is now. And next year, I can't wait. And then hopefully in the playoffs.
It kind of goes to the point, too, because against Jacksonville, they only used 11 personnel 61% of the time. They used 12 personnel quite a bit. That was back when they had like Tanner Hudson playing a lot of snaps for them. But remember, after the bye week, after the Seattle loss, who did the Giants add? They added Isaiah Hodgins.
Yes,
and Isaiah Hodgins came out against the Houston Texans, and he played a solid complement of snaps for somebody who's been in the building for a cup of coffee. And then his role continued to expand.
What do you think about the guy we just picked up today? Not that he's going to play in the playoffs, but what do you think about the Robinson? What do you think about that pickup?
James Washington.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed James Washington down at the Senior Bowl when I went down there the year he came out. He's a good kid, man. I asked him who was the hardest cornerback he ever went up against in the Big 12, and he was like, oh, Xavier Howard, easily. It was funny because Xavier Howard is still a really good cornerback in the league. So I've always liked James Washington. Never really got fully integrated into that Pittsburgh passing attack. Signed with the Cowboys, was supposed to be the replacement for Amari Cooper, but got hurt in training camp. Look, I like him as a deep speed threat. And I haven't studied his film extensively, but I've always liked his ability to take the top off of defenses. So if he can consistently do that still after his injury, then that's something that interests me. But I believe the injury was a Liz Frank. It was a foot injury, if I'm not mistaken, right? So if he still maintains that speed, which I am imagining that he will, then I feel like that's an interesting signing, but it's not one that I'm necessarily relying on. But I'm all about, Chris, I'm sure you are too, add as much talent as you can, bring them in, have them compete, and let the cream rise to the top.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm not. I don't even want to use the term excited, but it's just another smart move by Shane. It's just another smart move by Shane because maybe he's a contributor next year. I don't think he's going to contribute in the playoffs. I mean, he'd have to learn the offense, yada, yada, yada. But maybe he's a guy that could contribute next year. He was supposed to be the starter with Dallas this year with Gallup banged up, like you said. They lost Amari Cooper. Supposedly, he looked really good in training camp. He had a couple of good years with Pittsburgh. He's still only 26 years old. So maybe there's something there next year as a guy that could maybe be a fourth or fifth wide receiver for this football team. So
Dallas is weird, man.
What is that?
I'm sorry. Dallas is weird. Jalen Tolbert, they drafted that kid in the third round out of South Alabama. The kid couldn't find the football field this year. Yeah. We would be killing our general manager right now if we drafted someone in the third round who was healthy the entire year in a position that you needed healthy bodies at, where you had to go out and sign T.Y. Hilton to play like most of the snaps for you and stuff. If they couldn't find the football field, Chris, we'd be killing them. So look at what the Giants have done. And all these guys are finding the football field right now. It's just injuries really plagued this draft class.
I mean, the fan base was killing him for Wan'Dale Robinson not having much of a role for the first 4 or 5 weeks, let alone all year. I mean, NY Giants 26, who's better, Kayvon or Aiden Hutchinson?
So I haven't really studied Aiden's tape. Aiden Hutchinson finished the year, according to Pro Football Focus, with 11 sacks, 53 pressures. I was higher on Aiden Hutchinson coming out of the draft. I had a little bit of a higher grade than Kayvon Thibodeau, but I really do love Kayvon Thibodeau. And I wouldn't be shocked if he's going to I wouldn't be shocked if he's going to have a better career than Aiden Hutchinson. And I think Kayvon Thibodeau has probably, I don't want to say a higher floor because Aiden Hutchinson seems to be having some sort of success, but name me the weakness in Kayvon Thibodeau's game.
I don't think that. Listen, all we heard from the so-called experts going in to the draft was how he didn't have a motor. He didn't have the best attitude. His attitude, yada, 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 quit on plays. It's been the exact opposite. Even though he doesn't have the gaudy sack numbers, I've been more impressed with him this year than I thought I was going to be. And I was very excited for him, but he's impressed me in ways that I didn't expect. His motor is off the charts. And he seems like a really well-respected guy in that locker room. He already seems like he's taken a little bit of that leadership role outside of what he did with the Snow Angels. I know that was kind of looked down upon by a lot of people, but I've been super impressed with him. Like you said, I can't really compare him to Hutchinson. I don't watch the Lions week to week. I'll tell you this. I think Aiden Hutchinson is a damn good football player. I'll also tell you this. I think Kayvon Thibodeau is a damn good football player. I think he's going to be a damn good football player for the New York Giants for a very long time. So don't really care, to be honest with you. It's just as long as Kayvon becomes a high-end edge rusher for this football team, that's all I really care about. That's it at the end of the day. I think both those guys are going to be great.
I think that he's well on his way to being that. And I see people bringing up some of his run defense. Like, I think Kayvon Thibodeau is a fine run defender. I'll say there are times where he pinches a little bit too much. He might lose his gap a little bit. I think a lot of that stems from things that I saw in college as well. He's just trying to make a play, which sometimes you just need to be a little bit more disciplined. But all of that's correctable, right? It's not like he can't hold up at the point of attack. It's not a technique issue. Like, I feel like Kayvon Thibodeau is a much more advanced run defender than someone like Azeez Ojulari, who I love. But Ojulari is a little bit more of a pass rushing specialist than a Kayvon Thibodeau. Kayvon Thibodeau, man, I really think a couple more, getting into next year, training camp under his belt, weightlifting program, he's really going to be in for a really nice second season as a New York Giant.
I think, I don't know if he's going to match his stats, but I think he's going to have a second-year impact like JPP had.
That would be huge.
Yeah, he was top 3 or 4 for Defensive Player of the Year.
He's going to block a field goal too?
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know if he'll quite reach that level, but I think he's as good as he was this year. I think he's going to have a massive jump next year. Like, I'm really excited to see the growth of Kayvon next year because you see it. I mean, it's there. It's just about growth and learning the game and learning better technique and putting on a little bit more muscle, and he'll do it next year. I can't wait. Octave says, hello, fellas. I'll be at the game this Sunday. Let's hope for a win. Let's go Giants. Enjoy the game, Octave.
Love it, Octave. Octave, what are you wearing? Is there any sort of like blue out from the Giant fans that are going? Because I feel like I know personally a couple Giant fans that are going there, which isn't something that you necessarily see all too often with these playoff teams. I feel like a lot of home fan bases want to hoard those tickets.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. The Giant, and I get it. It's the first time in a long time that we've had a good football team. The Giants fans this year have traveled incredibly well. Mm-hmm. Remember when we played Jacksonville, we took over the stadium. We've traveled well this year as a fan base going on the road. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Giants fans there at that Minnesota game for sure. Jason's but you live in Arizona, so you probably haven't been at any Giants games this year.
No, I went to the practice. I was home and I went
that's
to
right.
the,
I remember.
You there.
Yeah. But stadium's loud this year. A lot louder than it's been in a long time.
A lot to be excited about.
Yeah, it's been fun. Jason says, I actually like the James Washington pickup, what we just talked about him. I think he has untapped potential. Shane always looking for talent. Hey, let's beat the Skull G-Men. That's why I love Joe Shane. That's why I love Joe Shane. Because to me, everybody saw that move today and they say, oh, this could help us for the play. It's not for the playoffs. But Joe Shane is always thinking about ways to improve this football team. Even on a week where the New York Giants are preparing for a playoff game, he's like, let me bring this guy in. Maybe this is a guy that can help us next year. So I love Joe Shane. I love Joe Shane. He's awesome so far. He's been great.
Absolutely. And I can't really name any mistakes he's made, right? Like, this guy is also someone who's traveling to all of these college football games.
I'm trying to think of
we have a Dable mistake, right? Like, I feel like Giant fan base, we can admit, Adoree Jackson, that was a horrendous move. And it's not like we believe that post-injury. We said that before. We're like, this is stupid. That's your cornerback. He's one of arguably the top 2 players on this defense. You can't put him there. And Dable's like, oh, well, you can get injured any play. It's like, you really increase your chances to get injured on a punt return, though. And that's exactly what happened, which sucked. But overall, obviously, Dable is absolutely amazing. But Joe Shane, man, we don't see the everyday intricacies of what he goes through or what he does, but I've absolutely loved what he's done. And
I can't, like, if I want to really nitpick, I could maybe find a little something, but there's not really much to find because he didn't have any money. Like, people talk about the Glowinski signing, like, what? Nah, that he was a body. We needed a body. We signed a guy for $7 or $8 million. He's going to fill a void for a couple of years as we continue to build up the offensive line. So that's a whatever move for me. It's not a great move. It's not a bad move. It was a necessary move. We needed a body. And we had very little money to spend. So I'm not going to kill him for that. You want to talk about maybe the way that he handled the Bradbury situation, but I don't think so. We always had to cut him. And I know that it dragged on longer than it should have, but I don't think there's much to complain about with Joe Shane at all. I think he's done a great job. I think his draft class, he had some bad luck because we had a ton of injuries with that draft class this year. But you see the talent. Dane Belton's displayed talent. We talked about Cordell Flott, a player I'm really excited about. Bellinger, fan favorite. Obviously, Kayvon. I think Neal's going to mature. We'll see going into next year. So I don't think there's much to complain about. And the most impressive thing, like you were alluding to, picking guys up out of nowhere. Guys like Isaiah Hodgins. Guys like Fabian Moreau, Landon Collins, like getting these guys that teams didn't necessarily want and getting them to contribute for this football team with a limited budget.
You can't give a chef a plate of crap and say, make filet mignon, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what Joe Shane ended up inheriting. Like, this was a terrible situation to inherit. Yeah, there was talent on the roster, but from a financial standpoint, we all knew. Kevin Abrams said it after the, 2021 draft. He's like, 2022 was going to be rough, ladies and gentlemen. And still, Joe Shane was able to turn this roster around with the coaching underneath, being able to coach these guys to put the Giants in the playoffs. That is an elite turnaround from this front office and coaching staff.
I don't think he could have done a better job, all things considered. I don't think he got rid of players on the team. He didn't add anybody of note outside of our draft picks. And the team had a 6-win increase or whatever it was. So it's been an incredible year. Jason says, I think our big offseason signing will be Tremaine Edmonds, popular name by many for Buffalo. I think we will also get a decent center in free agency. I think we draft our wide receiver 1. I don't know what we're going to do. All I could tell you, Jason, is I think we're going to attack all 3 of those positions you just mentioned in some way, shape, or form. I think we're going to draft the center. It might be in the second round. It might be in the third round. I saw the kid from Ohio State declared today who's supposed to be the if not the best center in this year's draft class, among the best centers in this year's draft class. But that's what I want. I want the Giants to draft a true center. And I like Nick Gates. Nick Gates does a fine job when thrown into action to play that position. But I want a true center, a guy that was brought up to be a center. I'm not saying first round, but I want them to draft the center this year. That's what I want.
When's the last time the Giants had an actual true center who wasn't like a tackle or a guard in previous locations or in college?
Long time.
It's been a while.
It's a long time.
It's been a hot minute, man.
Yeah, we need that. I think we need that. I think we're going to attack it this year in the draft. I think it'll be second or third round. Wide receiver, I have an inkling. I have a feeling. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I think the Giants are going to be open to trading for an established wide receiver in the NFL. I think they're going to look for it. I think they're going to look at the market, and if there's something that makes sense, I think they will do it. But they're not going to just force a trade. Joe Shane has displayed that at the trade deadline. But I think they'll explore it. If they can't find something, of course, they're going to have to attack it early in the draft. Even if they trade for a wide receiver, they still have to attack it early in the draft. That's how depleted that wide receiving core is. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting offseason. We still got the playoffs to talk about. And there's some exactly. So we already got, complained to about not talking about the playoffs. I'm looking forward to the offseason, Chris. Mr. Ildev says, beat Minnesota and come see us round. I'm going to tell you right. Let me ask you this question. That's an Eagle fan. He says, fight. What's going on, man? Thanks for popping in the stream. Let me ask you this. I'm going to give you option A. I'm going to give you option B. And I don't want to look past Minnesota because we could easily lose this week. I think this is going to be a coin flip game. It's going to come down to a 3 or 4 point discrepancy either way. But let's just play the game that we beat Minnesota. Option A, Seattle beats San Francisco, and we get to match up with the winner of the Bucs-Cowboys game. Option B, San Francisco beats Seattle, and we get to play the Philadelphia Eagles round 2. What's your preference?
I think I'd rather play Philadelphia than San Francisco, but I would rather avoid Philadelphia at all costs if it's not at the expense of San Francisco. So that's kind of where I'm at. So if you're saying
we can't play San Francisco until the third round. It's not possible.
Yeah. So
we're either going to play our second round opponent if we win is going to be the Cowboys, the Bucs. Bucs are going to be the favorite team that you probably want to play, or the Eagles. Mm-hmm. That's the choices round 2.
See, for me, I don't envision the Seattle Seahawks defeating the 49ers.
They're going to blow them out.
Anything can happen. I'm pretty sure the 49ers are going to take care of business and win that game, which makes us the lowest seed, which makes us play the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm already in the mindset. And again, I want to be clear. I don't think the Giants are a shoo-in to defeat the Minnesota Vikings. Like you said, it's going to be a close game. They need to be really smart and judicious with the football. They cannot turn the football over like they did in the previous game. They shot themselves in the foot, and yet it still took a 61-yard field goal to beat them. But still, Minnesota can win that game easily, right? So say the Giants do win. Going to Philadelphia, that's a tough ask. I mean, the Giants haven't won in Philadelphia since what, like 2012?
I think I was born in 85. It might have been then. That's how long it feels. It's been that. It feels like it's been that long.
And you think about the losses in Philadelphia. Oh, Chris, it makes me so freaking sick to think about. You got the Evan Ingram drop. You got like the 3-yard field goal by Jake Elliott, the 61-yard field goal by Jake Elliott. You had a 17-3 lead in 2019 that was blown back when Eli Manning started on like a Thursday night football game. Just devastating losses in Philadelphia. But this is, like Brian Dable said, a one-game season. And if the Giants can get past Minnesota, I don't want to play the Eagles, but I think I'd rather play them than the 49ers. I think the 49ers the
49ers are the class of the conference.
I do too. And yes,
I picked them to go to the Super Bowl before the year started. I had them in the Bills. So we'll see if I'm right. Hopefully I'm wrong because I want the Giants to go.
My guy Authentic just brought up the Deshaun Jackson punt return to go back to like 20,
that's the worst. That's one of the worst moments in
29, whatever that was.
New York Giants history. I'll tell you a quick story about that. I was at a bar for that game, with a bunch of my Giant friends, and I have a lot of friends that are Jet fans, and they like to poke at you when something bad happens to the Giants. And we were going back and forth during the game, and I was talking my smack through text message. I was like, "Oh, fly Eagles fly," with like smiley faces because we're up by 20 whatever points. As soon as Deshaun Jackson, I swear to God, I did this. As soon as Deshaun Jackson returned that punt, I turned my phone off. I didn't turn it on for 3 days. I turned my cell phone off and I did not turn it back on for 3 days. I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I need to get away. I was that depressed after that football game. That's how much that game hit me. That was a tough one. I don't even want to think about that. But I'm going to throw a wrench into this. Why I think it might be more beneficial to play the Eagles week 2. And I agree with you that they're the toughest matchup of those 3 teams. But odds are we're probably going to have to play them eventually if we want to make the Super Bowl, whether it be round 2, whether it be round 3. We've seen teams come out sluggish off a bye week, off a week in which they've had a bye. We saw it happen in 2011 with the Green Bay Packers when we went to the Super Bowl. Packers looked like they didn't know what they were doing for the first quarter and a half. They rested their starters the last week of the regular season, and I do think that bye week impacted them. So part of me's like, Jalen Hurts didn't look quite like himself. The Eagles finished the year really poorly. They didn't look like this, not just against us, against the Saints. Down the stretch, they didn't look quite like the same team. Part of me's like, I may want them in the second round coming off the bye. Maybe they come out a little sluggish. So that's just the devil's advocate of me. In terms of the teams, I agree with you. I would much rather play the Bucs. I would much rather play the Cowboys. But if I had the choice, if I knew I had to play the Eagles, whether it be round 2 or round 3, I think I'd rather play them round 2.
Yeah, same here. I think you have to swallow that pill eventually and play the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's not me saying I want the Philadelphia Eagles. They're a very good football team, but Jalen Hurts with a shoulder injury, you hit him, you pop him a couple times. I feel like it's a game that I would rather be in than traveling across the country to San Francisco. Like, I'm scared of the 49ers because of that diverse rushing attack. That's
49ers are the best team in the conference. You don't got to sell me on that. They're the best team.
I get it. They got Brock Purdy. It's a rookie quarterback. I think Wink Martindale could do a lot of cool, fun things against a rookie quarterback, but he also has Kyle Shanahan in his ear. George Kittle as a tight end who's going to be helping blocking the edge. I could just see them running GH counter on the Giants all game and Christian McCaffrey just feasting, which is unfortunate. But the biggest vulnerability of this New York Giants team we know is that run defense against those power concepts.
We're rooting for Seattle this week, bottom line. Get the 49ers out of the playoffs as quickly as possible. Absolutely. Going to read a couple of these members' chats. I don't want to lose these. I might have missed a couple. I'm sorry, guys. Goblins, man, thank you for being a member. He says, Chris, this is the perfect time to be 12 months in. What a roller coaster. I love you, man. We did it. I'm so glad we got Tibbs. He's the only guy I want. He's been fantastic. He's been incredible. He's gotten better and better over the course of the year. And I know I missed a member chat or two. I can't see him on the StreamYard, so I apologize to the members that I missed. Will, thank you for being a member. He says, I'm getting scared on how many people are picking the Giants to win this week. Let's go, G-Men. That doesn't scare me. And I know, like, as fans, like, we like to have that underdog mindset going in. You think about the Super Bowl runs where all this, the experts picked against us. Doesn't really bother me one way or the other. The players play the game. I believe in this team in terms of being prepared. I don't think the moment's going to be too big for them. Here's what I'll say. For anybody that may be nervous going into this game in terms of we have a inexperienced team in terms of playoff experience, this team's already played in 4 playoff games this year. I mean, both Washington games, as far as I'm concerned, were basically playoff games. The Minnesota game was basically a playoff game. The Colts game was basically, like, they were do or die games. Like, these were pressure-filled games. These were games that they needed to win to make the playoffs. So this team's already been battle-tested. I don't think the moment's going to be too big for this team.
I don't think so either. I think it comes down to coaching, right? Like, everything seems to come down to coaching, but I think they're going to have them prepared and focused. And I think there are actually really good leaders on this team who set the example. One being at the quarterback position, Daniel Jones. Look, Daniel Jones isn't that vocal guy, right, Chris? He's not out there. He's not rah-rah, similar to Eli Manning, but he sets the framework for how others on the team should operate. And those players tend to emulate his work ethic, right? And that's why they all galvanize around him. That's why it was so cool against the Colts when everyone was chanting his name. So I think the Giants will be prepared. There might be nerves and some jitters early on, but I'm sure the Vikings will experience that as well. And then once football starts to be played and you start to take those hits, football just kind of kicks in and then you just go from there.
Exactly. And I'm sure there's going to be a little nervousness coming out, but once they get their bearings, they're going to be fine. Dan says, just the fact that I no longer have to turn the game off when we go down 7 points speaks volumes to DJ and the coaching progression. I actually mentioned this on another podcast I was on, I think last night or the night before. It was last night. You know how I know this Giants team's gotten a lot better? I don't care. I'm saying over the course of the season. I don't care who they played. Like, you want to say the Colts, whatever. I don't care about the difficulty of opponent. The first half of the season, we could have played the worst team in the league, and I always went into every week feeling like this team needed to play perfect or close to damn near perfect football to have any chance to win. Like, we couldn't beat ourselves. We couldn't have stupid penalties. I don't feel that way anymore. I obviously we have to play more perfect than most teams because we don't have the talent. But this team, I think back to last week, I think it was the Colts game. I can't recall what game it was. It might have been the Colts game where Nick Gates has the penalty inside the red zone, and the New York Giants still overcome that. They have turnovers. They still overcome that. That's how I know this team has gotten better, because they're making mistakes in some of these games, and they're still able to overcome it and find a way to stay in these football games and win them. That's how I know this team has gotten better over the course of the year.
I also love how loyal they are to running the football. Look, we discussed ad nauseum at this point the Giants throwing out of 11 personnel using quick game. But think back to earlier in the season, and even recently, it'll be in the third quarter. Giants could be down fourth quarter. They'll still give the ball to Saquon Barkley 3 times in a row if those Vikings want to align and give them that favorable box, because this is what Mike Kafka does, right? If you want to set a tendency, if you want to give us something, the Giants are going to exploit that tendency, and they're going to take what you give them. And I appreciate that, because that sounds like it's easy. It sounds like every coordinator does that, but not every coordinator does. And New York Giant fans, unfortunately, in recent memory, we know that well.
All you got to do is look at the Washington game. The Washington game, they were killing us on the ground. I'm talking about the other coordinator who got fired. They were killing us on the ground, killing us. We couldn't stop Brian Robinson. They ran the ball 4 times in the second half with Brian Robinson. It blew my mind. Yeah. It blew my mind. So you're absolutely right. A lot of these coordinators just don't have the common sense to do what they're supposed to do. And I think you take that for granted sometimes when you have a good play caller. Like, let's talk about Kafka real quick, by the way, because reports have been coming out. He's been getting some interviews. I think 2 teams have already brought him in for an interview. What kind of an impact do you think that could have on Daniel Jones in this offense next year if he does take another job?
I think it could have a big impact, but also my question would be, who is replacing him? Like, are the Giants going to promote from within? Is it going to be quarterback coach Shea Tierney who's going to assume that role? We know that role.
That's what I think it's going to be, if I had to guess.
Yeah, Mike Kafka transitioned well into being a play caller. It doesn't mean that another play caller will do that. Will it be a more established guy, like say Scott Turner or somebody like that? I'm just not 100% certain, but any kind of lack of continuity could theoretically hurt Daniel Jones. But you still have Brian Daboll there, right? And Brian Daboll, it's hard to really, I guess, know whose system this is, right? Like, I would imagine it's more Daboll's with Kafka wrinkles, and then Kafka's kind of operating within it. So I think and I hope that all the terminology would still be the same for Daniel Jones, so there's not that learning curve. But I think losing Mike Kafka would be bad ultimately for the New York Giants, because I really do appreciate his ability to sequence plays, his ability to call plays, and his effectiveness in the red zone. I think he's just done a phenomenal job. Like, I don't think there's an award for a coordinator, but I think Mike Kafka should be considered for it if there were one.
Yeah, well, that's why he's getting interviews, even though he's only had 1 year as a play caller. I agree with you. It's certainly not good. I mean, Joe, we talk about how we've been coordinator after coordinator after coordinator for Daniel Jones. You're going to have another guy in his ear next year if he gets a head coaching job. But I'm not that nervous about it, because that was the whole reason why I wanted Daboll to begin with. I said to myself, this can happen. Offensive coordinators come and go. We need stability. So I wanted an offensive-minded head coach for something like this, because I do think Daboll has his fingerprints all over the offense. I think he's equally involved, even though he doesn't necessarily call the plays. So I don't think it's something that I'd be like, we're screwed. But, of course, you're not happy if you lose them. But I think it's something that we could overcome. And it's a good problem to have, because if you start losing coaches, it means your team's winning football games. So it's a good problem to have. Expect to see this happen more in the future if the Giants continue to play well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jeff says, I see a lot of Hostetler in Jones, but more mobile. Hostetler was pretty mobile. But yeah, Jones more mobile and much, much better athlete. What do you guys think? Go Big Blue, baby. Yeah, I didn't get to appreciate the full extent of Hostetler, but obviously I've watched highlights. I've watched film. He was a mobile quarterback. He was a pretty mobile quarterback. I think he's better than Hostetler. I hate comparing quarterbacks. I do.
Different eras. There's so much that goes into
comparing
that.
quarterbacks.
Yeah.
A lot of people bring up Eli and Jones just naturally because he's the guy that, they both learned under Cutcliffe. He's the guy that replaced him. Similar height, similar demeanor. I think he's more similar to Sims than he is Eli. If I had to compare one of the prior quarterbacks, because Sims was the guy that went to that small school. He was that tough as nails quarterback. He had that really tough upbringing the first 3 or 4 years as a Giants quarterback, some of it due to injuries, much like Daniel Jones. I think he's more similar to Sims in terms of that aspect than Eli Manning. But in terms of quarterback play, yeah, I suppose you could sprinkle in a little bit of Hostetler because of his mobility. But I think he's much better than Jeff Hostetler.
Yeah, different eras. It's really hard to really quantify that, Jeff. But I'll say this: Daniel Jones is big. Like Hostetler was I think 6'2", 6'3". He wasn't a small guy, but Daniel Jones 6'5", 230 pounds. Like Daniel Jones can run you over. Like he's a much bigger guy than I feel like a lot of us, or at least I can speak for myself, than I realize. Like if I stood next to him in a room, I really appreciate how big that dude is.
There's not a lot of quarterbacks that can move like Daniel Jones at his size.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Like how many 6'5" quarterbacks can run like he can? Not a lot.
No.
Josh Allen, but Josh Allen's a different type of running style. He's a guy that just mows you over. Not a lot. And I think that's an underrated attribute of his game. Pete says, ooh, that's not bad. Rich Gannon is more like what Jones can be. Rich Gannon won an MVP award with the Raiders. It was not that well. He wasn't great for long because I think he was a guy that kind of moved around and then he finally found his spot there with the Raiders. But Rich Gannon was a really good quarterback there for about 3 or 4 years. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's before my time kind of studying the quarterbacks, but I do know he had a really successful run. So I would love for Daniel Jones to get an MVP award and have the kind of accolades that Gannon has achieved in his career.
Yeah, I mean, he would, like I said, he only had a 3 or 4 year stretch where he was at the top of his game, but he was great for those 3 or 4 years. Hamza says, someone tell DJ to grow a playoff beard. He does look better. He looks more intimidating with the beard. Bob says, do you guys think Leo comes back if he doesn't rework that contract? Isn't he over a $30 million cap hit next year? Just curious. I think he's coming back. All right, I'll talk about it real quick, and then I'll let you give your opinion on it. Next year, he's $32 million against the cap. That's not because he got paid $32 million a year. It's because we've had to back out his salary the last couple of years because we went on a spending spree with Kenny Golladay. It screwed up the whole construction of the contract. I think originally it was a 3-year, $66 million deal, $22 million a year, but it got backloaded. So next year, it's a huge hit. I think he's definitely coming back. The question is he going to get extended? A lot of people talk about, can you just cut him? The $12 million in savings doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You're not going to find a player for $12 million, the difference in what it would cost to cut him or keep him, that's as good as Leonard Williams. He's a good, very good football player. So he's coming back. And in an ideal world, you extend him in an ideal world if he's willing to negotiate. I don't know if he's going to be, but if you could extend, I don't know what his market would be because he's a bit older, but if you could extend him on $17, $18 million a year for 3 years and spread out the money that way to give yourself some more cap flexibility, that's great. If he's not willing to do that, you play out the year and then you probably move on the following year. I mean, you got Dexter Lawrence, you're going to be given a whole lot of money. So I think he's definitely coming back next year. In terms of his long-term future with the Giants, it'll come down to whether or not he's willing to, talk an extension this offseason, in my opinion.
I agree with you, Chris. I think he'll be back next year. And I just don't really know what the Giants would do without Leonard Williams. If they do cut bait, they need to invest in that interior defensive line position. They run so much tight front in their base personnel package. If you put Dex over the nose, who's going to play those 2 4-eye spots or those 3 technique spots, wherever you really want to align them? So having Leonard Williams, I feel like is crucial to the run defense and their ability to rush the passer. It kind of sucks, man, this year that he's been dinged up and playing hurt the entire year because I think he could have had a really nice season.
I think he could have a really nice playoff.
Love it. Let's hope.
I love Leonard Williams. I think he's great. If you know, says we are going to win. This is what we do. I think we're going to beat Minnesota. I think it's going to be close. I think you'll be pulling your hair out, but I think we're going to beat Minnesota. Hester says, should we have to hesitate to pull Neal if he struggles? Who are you pulling for?
That's the thing.
It's
like, are we going to? Tyree Phillips would be the one that makes logical sense, but I'm not necessarily on that boat. I got to say, my one big, look, the Giants can't mess this up. Like, Evan Neal can't mess this up. Evan Neal is the liability, the critical vulnerability on the offense right now. And I think Danielle Hunter and players like that, Zadarius Smith, if they want to align him over there, even though they like to align him kind of as like a 3 technique over an interior offensive lineman, or even DJ Wanham, who I think beat him for a sack. I think he gave up like 7 pressures and 2 sacks maybe in that game. I know Andrew Thomas got beat for a sack in that game. I don't expect that to happen again, right? That was like an under center play action single back type of look. But man, I'm a little bit nervous about Evan Neal. That's my one reservation, I feel like, going into this game.
I agree with that because he didn't look great against the Eagles either. Part of me is because I think he had like 3 full starts in that game, at least 2. And part of me is like, maybe that had something to do with the quarterback, because it different cadence, maybe with the 3rd string quarterback in there. I don't know. But regardless, I'm worried. I mean, they got some good edge rushers on that team. And they're going to try to take advantage of Evan Neal. We talk about how we're going to try to take advantage of their center and their right tackle. That's going to be what they view as our weakness, that in the interior portion of our offensive line. So he's a rookie. I think he's going to get a lot better next year. But he's still got a lot of growing to do. But we're not pulling him. You're not putting Matt Parrott in there. You're not putting Phillips in there. Evan Neal is going to be the guy. Mm-hmm. David, man, thank you very much, man. What do you think Julian Love's value is? It's very hard for me to say because to be honest with you, David, I haven't looked at the safety market, and every year there's players that shock me in terms of the contracts that they get. If he hits the open market, there could easily be teams that are willing to pay more than you might envision. That's the beauty of free agency, right? There's Christian Kirk. If I would have told you last year was going to get $20 million a year before free agency started, what would you have told me? You called me crazy. Zadarius Smith, the year that the Packers signed him, nobody thought he was going to get the contract that he got. He got near, best edge rusher in football money. Of course, it proved out to be a good signing because he turned out, to take off once he went to the Green Bay Packers. But you don't know. I don't know what his market's going to be. But I'll tell you this. I think the Giants have a dollar amount that they're not willing to exceed to bring him back on this football team. They're not going to give him top safety money. I think there's a market in which they're willing to spend, and I do think they want him back. But if a team's willing to go out there and give him $16 million a year, I don't think that'll happen, by the way, but like Landon Collins got, they're going to let him walk.
Yeah, I think some of the contracts that are interesting, Derwin James, I think, makes the most. He makes like $19 million a year, which is a lot, right?
Yeah.
But you look at Marcus Williams, who signed with the Ravens last offseason, I think it's 14. Is that where Julian Love is? Or is he going to be more like a Jordan Poyer where it's like 9, a 10? Justin Reed, I think he makes about 10. If it's around that, I'm comfortable with it. If it's like 14, it's when I start to question it, which sucks because I really appreciate Julian Love, and I think he's a pivotal part of the leadership in that locker room. Think about this Giants defense when they suffered all those injuries. Julian Love was that one centerpiece doing everything. Yeah. And I think that's a very understated part of his game, is just how valuable he is from a continuity standpoint and just knowing all the roles and then executing them well when he is asked to.
And he's a guy that, even though he's been put in a set position this year, and I think that has a lot to do with why he's improved as a player, he's capable of moving all over the field, something that Wink, you would think, would like in this defense. So
yeah,
we'll see. I mean, we'll see in the offseason. I do think they want him back, but I think there's a certain dollar amount they're not willing to go over, and it's probably in that $8 to $10 million range. Chris, he says, Chris, would you prefer that the Giants start with the ball or let the Vikings start with it? I want the Vikings to start with it. That, generally speaking, that's what I want. I especially with this team, I think the Giants have proven that they're a team that's great at making second half adjustments. The coaching staff. We actually, Justin told me this stat yesterday when I was on their podcast. Giants ranked 3rd worst in time of possession in the first half this year. They ranked 2nd best in the second half. So we've been a team this year that has proven to be much better in the second half. If that's the case, I'd much rather have the ball to start the second half. So I want to defer if we win the coin toss. I'd rather Minnesota start with the football.
I'm always about the double dip too, man. Like when I play Madden, I never want to receive the football. I'm always kicking.
That's a great point though, because that is such a like if you could get the ball at the end of the first half, and even if you get 3 points, and then you start with the ball in the second half, that's such a momentum swing. If you could get 10 points, 14 points in 2 straight possessions, it's such a momentum swing.
I 100% agree. And I also think, man, like if the Vikings go out there and they go 3 and out, which is possible with that offensive line against the Giants defensive line, talk about setting a tone and then putting Daniel Jones into the football game after the Vikings just fell flat on their face offensively. It's just that defense, the Giants defense, that is, needs to hold up on that first possession, obviously.
Yeah, because obviously if Minnesota scores, all of a sudden he's got the pressure of the world on his shoulders. Yeah. So
yeah, but it's a long game.
Yeah, I'd rather kick off though. I'd rather kick off. Xerox says, afternoon, Jets. I can't wait till we bring in someone to replace Pinnock. He is awful. I mean, He is what he is. He's a depth player that they've asked to do more than they probably thought they were going to because of all the injuries they've had this year. So I'm not going to kill him. He's a depth player. He's a guy that we picked up off of waivers. So, yeah, I'm not going to kill him. He shouldn't be playing because we don't have the talent right now because of all the injuries we've had in that secondary.
I think Pinnock's fine.
He's okay. He's solid. I don't think he's a starter for a really good secondary, but he's fine for a depth piece in a secondary.
100%. And he's a specials guy.
Yeah, very good on special teams. That's why we brought him in. Dreadpool says, trade for Brandon Ayuk. What do you think? Yeah, I know your partner loves Brandon Ayuk. I love Brandon Ayuk.
I wouldn't be opposed, man.
I just don't know, are the 49ers going to want to do that? And I understand he's going to be a free agent after this year. I think it is. But I think they have the fifth-year option because he was a first-round pick. So,
yeah.
I don't know if they'd want to trade him. Brandon Ayuk to me is really talented. He's kind of similar, not to say he's going to be as successful, but Stephon Diggs kind of was. You saw how he took off once he became a featured number one wide receiver. Ayuk's the type of wide receiver where I could see that happening. Like right now, you've got Deebo Samuel there. You got George Kittle there. You got Christian. There's a lot of guys that are absorbing targets. He still had over 1,000 yards. And when you watch the 49ers, the guy's an incredible route runner. He's got great hands. And I remember I liked him. I think Arizona State, right? He went to.
Yeah.
I remember him going into that draft. I was a big fan of his. So I would love him. I think he fits exactly what you want. He's young, he's talented, and he's still ascending as a football player. It's going to cost you at least a first-round pick. It just is for a wide receiver that still hasn't reached his true potential. But I don't even know if he'd be available via trade. Like people bring up T. Higgins, they bring up Brandon Ayuk. We don't know that these teams are going to want to trade these players. Like they're young and super talented.
That's the thing. He was drafted in 2020. Brandon Ayuk. So he's not going to be a free agent, or he isn't potentially going to be a free agent until 2025. I don't know why the 49ers would want to do that. You still have him for another 2 years in this offense with Christian McCaffrey in his prime, Deebo Samuel, who you just re-signed. It doesn't really make sense to trade Brandon Ayuk on a rookie contract.
Yeah, that's why yesterday, and I didn't, I made a tweet that when the news came out about DeAndre Hopkins, all I said was I'd be interested under the right circumstances. And to me, the right circumstances are I don't have to extend you. I don't have to give up a first or second round pick. I give up, because he's 31 years old. If the right deal presented it, I'd be interested. And then people say, oh, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins. Yeah, of course, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins. But are those guys going to be available? The teams that have to want to trade those players, right? So, of course, I'd want the younger option. A guy like Brandon Ayuk could be great.
100%. I just don't know if those guys are disgruntled or their teams want to get rid of them because they are so young, and both those teams are still in their Super Bowl window. So it just doesn't really make sense. But anything can happen, man.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. Like Stephon Diggs, a lot of people probably didn't think Minnesota was going to trade him when they did. So you never know. So maybe next year we will get our Brandon Ayuk. That'd be great. We need to get somebody. I'll tell you that right now. We definitely need more help in that wide receiver room. There's no doubt about it. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Thank you to everybody for being here. We still got over 800 people in here, man. Thank you to everybody for being here. Hope you guys are as excited as we are for the playoffs. Thank you again, Nick, for coming on, man. Having a great time talking to you. Hopefully we do this again next week because that means we won. So,
yeah.
Fabian says, "Are we men or boys? Bring whoever our way." I think that was in when we were talking about who we would prefer in the second round. That's a good way to look at it. I mean, listen, I'm with you. Let's go out there and let's beat whoever you put in front of us. But it's an interesting question to ask who would be your preference in the second round. But at the end of the day, yeah, you got to beat who's ever on your schedule.
Absolutely. But I'm glad the Giants avoided the Saints in 2011.
I was going to bring that exact scenario up because I remember watching that game with my friend who was a 49er fan, is a 49er fan, and they were playing the Niners. We ended up playing the Niners in the championship game, which, by the way, they were a beast of a team. Their defense was ridiculous. But I was so excited when the 49ers won that game. And he's like, you should be excited. You should be happy. We're going to kick your ass. I'm like, I'm going to be honest with you. And I'm going to tell you right now, as good as that New York Giants team played during that playoff stretch, I don't think we would have beaten the Saints. The New Orleans Saints that year were ridiculous in the Superdome. They had that high-powered offense. I thought we matched up much better with the San Francisco 49ers. And the NFL is about matchups. So, yeah, you want things to play out your way, right, in terms of the scheduling during the playoffs, but you got to beat who's ever in front of you.
I think the Saints beat the crap out of the Giants that season, too.
They did. They destroyed them. They destroyed them.
49-24 in the Superdome. That's not something I wanted any part of.
That would have been tough. That would have been tough. Bob Wells says, Tana, any update on Carl Banks coming on your channel? We'll see. I mean, he told me to reach out to his agent or whatever she is, his representative. his assistant. And I emailed her yesterday. She got back. She asked me to give her the details to my platform. And I haven't gotten an email back quite yet. So maybe she's busy. I don't know. We'll see. So hopefully he's on the channel tomorrow. If not, we'll work something out, hopefully. But I'm still waiting on confirmation on that. Chris says, Tano, my man, who is a surprise player do you guys think will have an impact for the Giants on Sunday? All right, give me your surprise player on Sunday.
Okay, so surprise player. We've talked probably about the entire Giants 11 personnel package, right? I'm wondering, and this guy could either have a role or he could do absolutely nothing. And I am not 100% sure which way to lean. So I wanted to ask you too, Chris. Lawrence Cager. Does Lawrence Cager earn snaps with the Giants here? And will the Giants roll out, like we said at the top of the show, a 12 personnel package that is really an 11 personnel package because Lawrence Cager is a wide receiver listed as a tight end? I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm just probably going to default and say the surprise player will be somebody in the secondary who is going to have a free shot at Kirk Cousins because Wink Martindale is going to load up the line of scrimmage with 7 guys. They're going to use a 6-man protection, and like a Nick McLeod or a Jason Pinnock is going to come in and sack Kirk Cousins, possibly forcing a fumble. But it's going to be a secondary guy. And it's going to be one of those guys that we typically don't like to have out there, but I feel like they're probably playing better than we give them credit. So Nick McLeod or a Pinnock or a player like that.
Okay. I don't think Cager's going to have much of a role in this game, even though I would like to see him used a little bit around the red zone. And maybe he will be. Maybe he will catch a touchdown. My surprise guy.
Kenny Golladay. No.
That's what everybody wants to say, right? Because everybody's
right, yeah.
I'm not going to say that. I don't think he's going to be featured too much in this game. My surprise guy. You know what? And it'd be a surprise, but I like him. And I like what the New York Giants have been doing down the stretch with him. I'm going to say Breida has a big play in this game.
Oh, Breida.
I'm going to say Matt Breida has a big play in this game. I think they're going to bring back that 2 running back set that they've used in more recent weeks with the orbit motion with Saquon Barkley, and it's going to spring a big play for Matt Breida, whether it be in the passing game, the running game. He's going to have like a 30, 40-yard splash play. I think Matt Breida, that's my surprise pick. I think he's going to have a big, important play in this football game.
And it's something that we've seen Mike Kafka and Brian Dable employ against the Vikings. The third series, if I'm not mistaken, the Giants came out in that pony package, 21 personnel, with Saquon Barkley as the wingback being used on the orbit motion. They handed the football off. It was Gary Brightwell, though, and it was a loss of 1 because Dalvin Tomlinson bench pressed one of the Giants' interior offensive linemen. And I was like, oh, I miss seeing 94 out there. But yeah, I think that's certainly something that can happen. I would love to see that 21 personnel package.
Yeah, I would too. I think that they used it against the Colts as well. I saw it. See, people are saying Hodgins. I didn't say Hodgins to me is not a surprise. Hodgins is our number 1 wide receiver at this point, so he wouldn't be a surprise to me. It would have to be, from an offensive standpoint, it would have to be somebody like Breida or maybe Golladay or Cager.
The best one would be, though, and this isn't one that can be really, I guess, assessed through statistics other than pressures and sacks allowed, would be Evan Neal. If Evan Neal could come out and just shut down Danielle Hunter and shut down that pass rush, if that can happen, I would feel so freaking comfortable. Because like we said a little earlier, that is the one thing that I'm a little bit worried about.
That would be huge. That would be huge. I'm going to tell you a guy that I hope he doesn't get a lot of action. But if he does, I hope he has a big game. And it would probably be a little bit of a surprise to me because he's been very up and down this year. Our punter. I hope he has a really good game, the Scottish Hammer. So, but I'm gonna go with Breida. I just have a feeling he's gonna have a big play in this game.
Love it.
Octave says, at the game, I'll be rocking my Eli Manning jersey. What's your favorite jersey you own?
Me?
Yeah.
Mark Bavaro, because Mark. Yeah, my middle name is Mark because of Mark Bavaro. That's my father named me.
So you had to buy that.
Nicholas Mark. Yeah, because I was a really preemie baby, and I put my mother in the hospital. I was like born like 2 months before I was supposed to. So my mother was in the hospital for a while, and like doctors were like, oh, we don't really know what's going on with this like baby and stuff like that, a little bit of uncertainty. So my father gave me the middle name Mark because he was such a tough SOB. And my dad was also a Notre Dame fan. So that's another reason.
I didn't get to appreciate Mark Bavaro, but you name like the top 10 favorite Giants of all time, he's on most people's list that got to watch him during that stretch. Like he's the embodiment of a New York Giant. Like when you think New York Giant, you think Mark Bavaro. You
stoic.
Yeah.
You know?
Love it. You think guys like Mark Bavaro. David, man, thank you very much, man. He says, asking again, what do you think Julian Love's market value is in 20? We already answered it, but we were running behind, so I'm sorry. He says, is it in 23, and did the Giants sign him? Yeah, again, his market's very unpredictable. Maybe you didn't hear it earlier, David. but we're a little bit behind. His market for the Giants, I think, will be between $8 and $10 million. I don't know what other teams will be willing to pay him. And the Giants aren't going to be able to use the tag on him like they'd be able to use on probably Barkley, because you can only use one tag. So if he wants to explore his market, he's going to have the opportunity to do it. So I can't predict what other teams are going to be willing to spend. I haven't looked at all the other safeties available, what teams need in this year's upcoming free agency class. I don't think the Giants would exceed $8 or $10 million, though, because of all the other needs on this football team.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We already kind of talked about that. We said Marcus Williams is the safety who was signed by the Ravens from the Saints last year, gets paid $14 million a year. I think if the contract exceeds that, which it may or may not, I'm not really 100% certain. I don't know if the Giants chase that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think they would. Richard Rodriguez says Pinnock is not awful. Great when blitzing. He's fine for what he is. He's not a guy that I want starting, but he's fine for what he is. He's a decent situational player. And he's a good depth player in the secondary. I'm fine with him. I just don't want to be a starter. We didn't expect that.
Which is fair. Absolutely.
Yeah. Jeremiah, man, thank you very much. He says, hey guys, playoffs, baby. Let's go. DJ. All right. Let me get your, I know you might not want to do this, but let me get your prediction. DJ contract looks something like 4 years, $120 million, 50 or 60 guaranteed. Also incentive laden opt out after 2 years. Thoughts? That's exactly where I have him. I have him at either 3 for 90, 4 for 120. I think it's going to be between $28 to $32 million a year on average for 3 or 4 years with the ability to get it after 2 years. That's where I have it.
That's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at too. I've been saying like a 2 to 4 year, and it makes more sense for 4 because Daniel Jones is still young, and it's going to behoove him to be like, hey, I kind of want to sign. It could be short term and I'll prove myself. And then that will set me up for another bag, right? Because I don't have the best track record in the past to rely on. This is like my year that I'm cashing in, and I'm so happy for him that he is. So I think it's going to be around that. I think around, I was always thinking like 28 to 30 million a year, 28 to 32, whatever it is. And I think it should be incentive laden. And I also definitely think the Giants should have something that they can get out of it just in case if things go south.
And that's the way contracts work.
Exactly.
So that's not specific to Daniel Jones.
No.
Generally speaking, when a quarterback signs a 4-year deal, there's a way to get out 2 years in. And that's the way I think they'll structure it. They're not going to fully commit 4 years to the guy. They're going to say, we're going to give you 4. We'll commit half of it. We'll give you 50, 60 million guaranteed. Like he just said, we'll commit half of the set. We'll commit 2 years to you. We'll continue to build up this team. If things go really south next year, which I don't think they will, but if they do, you always got to prepare as a general manager. Even if Jones is still under contract for another year, you still have the option to draft a quarterback.
Yes.
So that's what I think they're going to do. I think they're giving him a 4-year deal, 2-year commitment, and we'll take it from there. That's where I think the Giants are at right now in the Daniel Jones situation. And Prum, man, thank you very much. He says, Sexy Dana, what is your favorite stat from this season? And do you think we keep Jamie Gillen next year? I mean, there's a lot of stats I've brought up. My favorite stat this year, and if we keep Gillen, I'll speak on that real quick. If we keep Gillen, I think there'll definitely be competition for him next year. But I don't know how much the Giants are going to want to spend on a punter. So I think there'll at least be competition. I'm not a huge fan of Gillen. He's got a big leg, not very good in terms of directional punting. So I think they'll at least bring in competition. He could be back, but I would lean that he won't be. As far as the first part of your question, my favorite stat this year, I'm not going to go in depth. I'm not going to go too analytical. The red zone offense stat. That's my favorite stat this year for the New York Giants. And I could mention the time of possession stat as well. I could mention the fact that we possessed the ball 2 minutes and 55 seconds on average this year per drive, which is the highest we've been since 2008. But for me, my favorite stat this year has been the improvement in the red zone. I talked about that at great lengths the last 2 years under Jason Garrett, in which we ranked 31st and 32nd, dead last in the NFL last year. And we have not been higher than like 20 since like 2010. We've been a horrible red zone offense for a very long time. We're 7th in the league this year, and it's been trending upwards over the course of the season. So my favorite stat this year has been the efficiency from within inside the 20-yard line on the offensive side of the football.
It translates in EPA too, which is an advanced stat, just kind of analyzing how offenses are. EPA, expected points added. Giants were 11th in offensive EPA this year. They were dead last. I'm talking about like head cut off, decapitated type of last year under Jason Garrett. So that stat is awesome. And also just Dexter Lawrence and all the pressures he's getting from the A gap. I saw a stat that Mike Renner posted, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like 40 of Dexter Lawrence's pressures come from either the one technique or the nose tackle position, Chris. The next highest in the NFL, I think, is DJ Jones, who was in like maybe 18, 16. Like it's incredible what Dexter Lawrence is doing from the A-gap position. A lot of that is just him just being an absolute beast. A lot of it is also Wink Martindale scheming up a lot of guys up towards the line of scrimmage, creating one-on-one blocks. Because guess what? Blocking Dexter Lawrence one-on-one is not fun. And I feel like Wink Martindale puts that kid in a position to succeed. And credit to him, man. He is just absolutely phenomenal. One of the best defensive players in the league right now. And I do not think that's hyperbolic.
I would say it's Geno Smith, but outside, because I think Geno Smith's going to win most improved player. This is where I'm going to go with this question. So if you want to argue Geno Smith for people in chat, I get that. Outside of him, because he took a huge jump. He's basically a career backup that became a Pro Bowl starting quarterback this year. Outside of him, has there been a player this year that has had a bigger leap than Dexter Lawrence? Dexter Lawrence was always good. Always good. He's all pro this year. For him to take that jump, and I think a lot of that goes to our defensive line coach, too, who was terrific.
Andre Patterson.
Yeah, well, when he was with Minnesota, he had that reputation. I was very excited that when we brought him in. Wink talked about how excited he was in terms of, he said at the end of the year, if you're not a Pro Bowl by the end of this year, we failed you. So the coaching has a lot to do with it, but it is hard to find a player that has been more improved this year in the NFL. I'm not just talking about with the Giants than Dexter Lawrence.
I'll say this, though. Dexter Lawrence did have, and I don't feel like a lot of people acknowledge this, he had 43 pressures last year.
He
wasn't getting those sacks. Yeah. He was phenomenal to me on tape last year. He just wasn't getting those sacks. Now he's capitalizing, getting those sacks. I think a big reason why is just where he is aligning and the fact that he has a coordinator who is aligning so many guys up on the line of scrimmage, allowing him to have those one-on-ones. Also, he's freaking amazing against the run, which is something that shouldn't be a shock because he's like 345 pounds, but the dude is making plays outside the numbers. Like how many 345-pound defensive linemen, Chris, make plays outside the numbers? That play against Baker Mayfield in week 2 where he chased Baker Mayfield, that was a 3rd and 2, and he stopped him and forced a 4th down. Like incredible effort right there from Dexter Lawrence. I'm just so glad that this has been here the entire season on this kid. I just feel like he's playing well. And
he's been consistent I see people in the chat saying biased. I don't think that's biased. I think Dexter Lawrence is one of the most improved players in the NFL this year. Somebody said Tua. To me, Tua's he's been improved, obviously. Kind of helps when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, I think Authentic brought up a good player, and it's somebody who hits home for New York Giant fans, and that's Evan Ingram.
Yes.
And look, Evan Ingram was misused by every single coaching staff he had here in New York. And I'm actually very happy for him that he landed with Doug Peterson. We knew Doug Peterson was going to get the most out of that kid because that guy's track record with tight ends and people who align in the slot is insane.
Yeah, no, that is a good one. Evan Ingram did have a nice year this year for Jacksonville, and he's been a good blocker too, an improved blocker. Peter says, Tana, remember you welched on the sexy Dexy dance. I do it. I just don't do it standing up, but I do the sexy. I do it every game when we stream the games, but I haven't done a stand-up version of it, Peter. But if we win the playoffs, I guess I'll try to do a stand-up version. My camera's not big enough for you guys to see my whole body, but we'll definitely do a sexy Dexy dance this week if they win. And by the way, that's my favorite sack dance in the league.
Yeah. Well,
how
who
does
else
that not
would
bring
come
a
up there?
smile to your face every time he gets a sack? It's great.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, what other sack dance are there that's that great? I mean, you have like the JJ Watt one's pretty cool, right? Which we're not going to see anymore. You had Sean Merriman's, which was really cool back in the day.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other iconic ones. Who was the guy in the Giants, the defensive tackle that used to do the machine?
Fred Robbins.
Yeah,
Fred Robbins.
That was elite.
Yeah, that one was freaking amazing. And I liked also in 2007.
Strahan did the flex. He was
the flex,
for the flex.
And then he added the stomp him out a little bit.
Stomp him out, yeah.
Yeah.
The bowling. They did the bowling.
Oh, yeah, that's going back, man. That's fun.
Yeah. Molly says, honestly, rather have Flott playing than Moreau. Whichever they go with, I'm going to be fine with. I mean, Moreau's given us spurts this year where he's been good. Flott looked good last week. Flott's looked overmatched at times as well. He's still a rookie, still young. He's still undersized. We'll see who they go with this week. Flott, long-term, I agree. But
absolutely.
For this game, I could see them going with Moreau. But we'll see.
Which I'm fine with, too.
Yeah,
you've been rolling a little bit more so with Moreau than Flott, but I think what Flott has shown is definitely encouraging. But this is a big spot, and Moreau is a veteran who has kind of seen a lot in the league.
Yeah, and he's played good at times for the Giants this year.
Yes.
Samuel said, but he has one of the plays of the year this year for the Giants, by the way. The tackle on the 1 yard line.
Yeah, against Jacksonville?
Yeah, tackle on the 1 yard line. Samuel says, I live in Minnesota. Have to watch the game with Viking fans. That's horrible. That's horrible.
Have fun with that, Samuel.
Come to the stream. Hang out with Giants fans during the game, Samuel.
Are Viking fans as mean and ruthless as fans from the Northeast, though?
Everything I've heard about Minnesota fans are they're sweethearts. That's everything. Like they're the nicest people in the world. That's what I've always heard about people from that area of the country.
Yeah, the Twin Cities, they seem like very nice people. So maybe you'll have a good time, Samuel. But if not, just give them the bird and tell them to go screw themselves. Dude, they're a team, Chris. They're a team, and it still blows my mind. They have a negative point differential with like a 13-4 record, which is like the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life.
I wonder if that's ever happened before. I'd have to look into that. I can't imagine it has.
I can't. No, they won just so many tight games, and then they got their asses kicked by Green Bay, which just sunk it all.
And the Cowboys beat them 40-7.
Yeah, the Cowboys too. And the Cowboys do that to teams sometimes, man. They'll just pour it on. I remember, I think it was like 2021 maybe, where they played Washington on a Sunday night football game, I think it was. And they just literally, they beat them like 58-7 or something like absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, that they pad their stats sometimes. That's that they're notorious for doing that. They blow them out, and then when they play a really good team, Dak doesn't show up. Peter says, what's the free agent market look like for inside linebacker? Do you think we draft? I mean, people have brought up Edmonds all stream. That's been the most popular name. I haven't taken a huge deep dive into the inside linebacker position or free agency in general.
So I pulled it up. I pulled it up right here.
Yeah.
So it looks like Tremaine Edmonds is the one that I'm really interested in. It appears like some of these guys, like, is Devin Bush, is he going to be still available? He's on the list here. I'm on, what is it, Spotrac or however you pronounce it. Guys like John Bostic, who had, I think, the best game of his career against the Giants in the
Milano. He's always a guy that's available. Matt Milano.
I think they signed him though, and he's
Did they sign him? Did they?
He's coming from Buffalo as well. But Alex Anzalone, it says, is going to be a free agent. Sometimes I feel like I look at Spotrac and they say people are going to be free agents, and then I realize they sign a 3-year contract, and I'm like, well, what the hell? Why'd you lie to me? But there's going to be some players, and I'm just looking for another veteran presence in there. You need to add bodies to that position. Because, dude, we went into the season, Chris, with Austin Calitro penciled in as one of the starters and like one of the players who was going to see it.
Oh my God, our linebackers, dude. I'm thinking back. Devontae Downs was the starter a couple years ago to open the season. We had
God, dude.
Our linebackers have been so bad. And I've actually said, people have asked me, because of how slim the free agency class is for the wide receiver, because that's obviously another pressing need for this team, along with corner, interior offensive line. If we do spend this year in free agency on any specific position, that's the position I think it'll be. The linebacker spot. I don't think it's going to be a insane contract at that position, because we have our in-house guys to sign. But if we're going to spend, say, $10, $12 million a year on an outside player, I think it'll be a linebacker. Which guy, I don't know, but that's where I think we'll spend our money this year if we bring in an outside guy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Jeremiah says, do you guys think we could trade up in the draft to get a wide receiver like Quentin Johnston, move up to between 13th and 16th for our first pick? We could. I mean, we got a ton of draft picks, right? I think we got 13 draft picks, 11 draft picks, I should say, between comp picks and the additional picks with the Kadarius Toney trade. I don't think we will. I unless we really like a player. I don't think we will. I think we're going to stand pat. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see the process. I mean, right now I've seen mocks where Quentin Johnson goes top 8, top 9, but you don't know. I mean, he may drop to where we're picking by the time of the draft. Things happen during the process with the combine and everything else. Here's what I'll say. If they value a player strongly enough that they feel it's worth giving up the draft capital that'll cost to move up, they'll do it. I doubt it though. I don't think they're going to trade a hole to move up that much in the first round. You're talking about 10, 11, 12 spots. You're talking about potentially giving up a future first round pick if you're jumping that high in the first round. So I don't see that happening. I think we'll stand pat and take the best player on our board.
I'm kind of right there with you, but anything can happen, and this is very early on in the process. Ask me in 2 weeks, I might have a different opinion.
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, listen, if there's a deal there and there's a player that you like enough, you do it. Gavin says, since the Washington football team game won the 2020 game, the tie, DJ has been carrying the offense. Does it continue into the playoffs? And 11 second Snow Angels are the best dance. Referring to the Kayvon Thibodeau celebration. Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't see any reason why it won't. Daniel Jones outside. Is this fair to say? And I'm not taking anything away from Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley was incredible this year, and he was great the first half of the season. He was the most outside of Andrew Thomas, the best player on our offense. I think Andrew Thomas the most consistent player on our offense this year. But outside of Andrew Thomas, I think Daniel Jones has been the most consistent player for the Giants this year on offense. He just has, I think. Is that fair to say? I think it is.
I don't think it's unfair to say. And I think a lot of it is because of Daniel Jones' development and growth and what the coaching staff is doing. I mean, look at what this guy has had to deal with. And I brought this up on other platforms, but we thought the 11 personnel package with 3 wide receivers would be 3 guys that are either not on the team right now or are injured, with Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, Kenny Golladay, we thought was going to have a huge impact, did not, Kadarius Toney. But that's not what happened. I mean, we had Darius Slayton as like the 5th guy on the depth chart, and he's one of the primary receivers that Daniel Jones has been throwing to. Luckily, they have some sort of rapport, but Richie James is now a huge part of this offense. Isaiah Hodgins. So Daniel Jones has kind of had to cycle around a bunch of different personnel that he's throwing the football to. Daniel Bellinger was out for a large chunk of the season, and Daniel Jones was still able to have success and win football games. I mean, that's not easy to do. So I don't think it's unreasonable for you to say that because Saquon Barkley kind of had that lull after the bye week and after the Houston game specifically. And then once, as we said earlier in this podcast or whatever, once the Giants went to a more 11 personnel approach where they were using quick game and throwing the football, they were able to establish a rushing attack that was more formidable than what they were doing out of 12 personnel, which doesn't really make any sense when you just think about it from a personnel side of it. But at the same time, the defense is playing you a little bit differently, typically, if you're out there with 11 personnel rather than 12 personnel. And the Giants also kind of got away from power gap a little bit and counter and started running a lot more inside zone and duo. And for whatever reason, the Giants up front are blocking a little bit better. And I just feel like the double teams up front are doing a much better job right now than they were even 4 weeks ago. And maybe that's because Ben Bredesen is back. Maybe that's just because guys are a little bit more healthy. Evan Neal came back. I think that helped a little bit. But I right now is also maybe not at its peak of the season because they were so effective early on, but it's much better than it was when there was that lull against Detroit.
I think you could make an argument, though, as a whole, the rushing attack is as strong as it's been all year because Daniel Jones. Because Daniel Jones has been running the ball very effectively down the stretch, and I think Barkley's starting to get that. You could see it. The last 2-3 games that he played, you're starting to see he's got that burst back. I think we're going to be able to run the ball all over Minnesota this week. I really do, between Barkley and Jones's legs. But we're also going to throw it. We're going to try to throw it too. But I think we'll be able to run it when we want to this week against Minnesota. But yeah, listen, I'm not too worried about Daniel Jones in this game. I'm not telling you he's going to go out there and throw 7 touchdowns, but I'm not too worried about Daniel Jones in this game. I think he'll show up. I think he'll give you a good performance, and I think he'll give you an opportunity to win this football game. I'm not too worried about Daniel Jones in this game. Yeah, I'm just not. But we're going to get set to close this out. It's 8:11. I still haven't eaten.
Jeez.
But man, I just and it's 5:11 by you, so it's probably getting close to dinner for you.
6:11. Yeah, Arizona.
It's a 2-hour. I thought it was 3 hours in Arizona. It's 2 hours.
So Arizona, we don't do daylight savings time. So some of the year we're on Mountain Time, which is what we're on now. Most of the year we're on Pacific Time, but right now we're on Mountain, so we're 2 hours behind you.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, a little weird, right? Yeah, we just totally rebel. We're like, no, screw that stuff. We're not doing that.
Peter says Nick Gates has to win Comeback Player of the Year. Should have the captaincy. I'd love to see him win it. I don't know if he's got the name recognition to win the award, but I'd love to see him win it. I mean, the guy battled back from what was many thought was going to be a career-ending injury. So that'd be great. And hopefully he's back next year with the Giants, and hopefully he gets that captain's badge because I think he's one of the most respected guys in that locker room for this New York Giants football team. But I just want to say thank you to all you guys for always tuning into the streams. Thank you guys for all the support. If Carl doesn't come on tomorrow, hopefully he does. But if he doesn't, I'll probably still go live. We got playoffs this week. We're all excited. I'll be live Friday. I'll be live Saturday. Obviously be live Sunday for the game. Nick, Dan's not here anymore. Tell him I said thank you. Thank you for coming on. I'm looking forward to doing this again with you guys next week when we win, because it's going to happen. We're going to come back on. We're going to recap the Minnesota game. We're going to dive into the matchup against the Eagles or the Cowboys or whoever we're playing. And it was a blast. This season's been a blast. Can't wait for the playoffs. I'm so amped up. But yeah, Nick, man, close it out, man.
Hey, everybody. First playoff appearance since 2016. The whole boat fiasco, it's in the past. Get rid of it. It's not there anymore. New York Giants are going to play a playoff game that is very winnable against the Minnesota Vikings, a team that they could have beat a few short weeks ago. And Daniel Jones, hopefully he can get his first playoff win. I'm really psyched about it. I'm hyped up. Everybody's hyped up. Let's get this dub. Let's go, Big Blue.
Love it. And by the way, I saw Nona post it. Wanted to give them a shout out. They're growing their channel on YouTube. They got a podcast off of it.
Man.
Great film breakdowns. Go over there, check them out. Links right there. Thank you for posting that, Nona. Big Blue Banter. They got a great podcast over there. Always love coming. They bring a really good perspective to the New York Giants, and they educate me as much as you guys. So I appreciate you for coming on today, talking Giants football. So have a good night, everybody. We'll talk soon. Be good, everybody.